She took my ring. It was her, Victoria Langford screamed. It was her? She stole my diamond ring. Annie Carter froze in her chair. The diamond ring was still in her hand. No, Annie said, her voice catching in her throat. No, I didn't take it. I did not take your ring. Victoria Langford sat rigid in her chair. Her pearl-colored dress lay perfectly smooth across her knees, while her face was tight with outrage. You didn't take it? Victoria snapped, pointing straight at Annie's hand. Then why are you holding my ring? Annie looked down. Under the warm golden lights of the restaurant, the diamond shone so brightly, it almost hurt her eyes. It was on the floor, Annie said. It rolled over here. I picked it up because I thought someone had dropped it. Victoria let out a sharp, cold laugh. How convenient. I was going to give it back. Were you? Victoria leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Or did you see my ring fall, pick it up, and try to slip it into your purse before I caught you? Annie's face burned. No, that is not what happened. Then explain it, Victoria said. Explain to me why my diamond ring is in your hand. Mr. Howard Bennett, the restaurant manager, quickly approached from the front desk. He was about 60 years old, calm in his movements, his face carrying the practiced politeness of a man used to handling difficult situations. Miss Langford, he said, please lower your voice. We can resolve this calmly. Victoria did not lower her voice. Resolve this calmly. She is holding my engagement ring. Annie quickly held the ring out. Please, take it. I don't want to hold it. I only wanted to return it. But Victoria did not reach for it. That frightened Annie more than the shouting. If Victoria only wanted the ring back, she would have taken it. But she did not. She kept staring at Annie, as if the accusation mattered more than the diamond itself. You expect me to believe you were only trying to help? Victoria said. I am telling the truth. The truth? Victoria pressed her lips together. The truth is, Richard left the table. I looked down, and my ring was gone. Then I turned around and saw you holding it, because it fell near me. Near you, Victoria repeated, as though it were the most ridiculous thing she had ever heard. Of all places, it just happened to fall near you. Then Victoria's eyes shifted down to Annie's purse hanging on the back of her chair. Or maybe you thought you could sell it, Victoria said, her voice rising again. Is that it? A ring like this could pay for quite a lot, couldn't it? Rent, clothes, whatever little sad story you plan to invent after walking out of here with something that did not belong to you. I did not steal anything, Annie said. You can ask anyone here. Victoria raised an eyebrow. Anyone? Annie turned slightly in her chair and looked toward the tables around her. Her voice trembled, but she tried to speak clearly. I did not steal anything. Everyone saw me sitting here. I did not go to her table. I did not touch her things. That is true, isn't it? No one answered. Annie swallowed the hurt and tried again, this time more softly. Please, she said, looking from one table to another. I did not steal anything, did I? A few faces changed. Some people looked ashamed. Others seemed about to speak, then quietly looked down again. But no one stood up for her. Suddenly, Victoria lifted both hands to her mouth and began to sob. Her shoulders shook as if she had just suffered a terrible shock. Oh my God, she choked out. She really did it. She knew exactly what she was doing. She tried to steal it, and when I caught her, she pretended she was going to return it. Miss Langford, Mr. Howard began. Please. No, Victoria sobbed. One hand pressed against her chest. Do you know what that ring means? Richard gave it to me. It is a family heirloom. She saw it. She wanted it. And she tried to take it. She just wasn't fast enough. Annie stared at her. Victoria's tears changed the air in the room. Some of the faces that had been uncertain before now softened toward Victoria. Her tears dressed the accusation in a new kind of clothing, making it look almost like the truth. Annie felt panic rising in her throat. But this time, anger rose with it. No, she said. That is not fair. Victoria sniffed. Not fair? You were holding my ring. I was holding it because I picked it up from the floor, Annie said. And when I tried to give it back to you, you would not even take it. Why? Why wouldn't you take it when I held it out? Why did you just sit there and accuse me? Victoria's crying caught in her throat. Annie leaned forward slightly. If I really meant to steal your ring, Annie said, why would I hold it up in front of everyone? Why would I tell you to take it back? Why would I sit here and ask people to check what happened? Victoria's eyes went cold, but she did not answer in time. A young waitress named Maria Sanchez stood a few steps from Mr. Howard, still holding the water pitcher she had forgotten to set down. Her eyes moved from Annie's trembling hand to Victoria's nearly untouched glass of wine, then to the space between the two tables. Mr. Howard, Maria said quietly, there is a camera facing this area. Victoria turned sharply toward her. What did you say? Maria kept her composure, though her voice remained careful. The dining room cameras, ma'am. They may show whether the ring fell. Victoria's expression changed for a split second. The corner of her mouth tightened. Then she lifted her chin. Fine, she said. Check them. And while you are at it, call the police. Annie held her breath. The police? Yes, Victoria said. Unless you think theft should be handled with a free dessert. I did not steal it. You keep saying that while you were caught holding my ring. Mr. Howard held out his hand toward Annie. May I hold the ring? Annie placed the ring in his palm. Her fingers felt ice cold as the diamond left her hand, but the accusation still clung to her. At that moment, Richard Whitmore returned from the hallway, his phone still in his hand. He stopped beside Victoria's chair when he realized every eye in the restaurant was turned toward their table. What happened? He asked. Victoria immediately reached out and grabbed his arm. Richard, she stole my ring. I caught her holding it in her hand. Annie looked at him. Richard was much older than Victoria. His face carried the weary confidence of a man used to being served, used to being respected, and used to having problems disappear before they could ever truly touch him. Sir, Annie said, forcing each word out of her throat. I found it on the floor. I was going to return it. Please check the cameras. Richard Whitmore did not answer Annie right away. He stood beside Victoria's chair, his phone still in his hand. The light on the screen slowly faded, leaving a cold, dim glow in his palm. Richard, Victoria said, gripping his sleeve tightly. Don't just stand there. She had it. She had my ring in her hand. Richard looked at Mr. Howard. Is the ring secured? Yes, sir, Mr. Howard replied, carefully holding the ring in his palm. I have it right here. Good. Richard slipped his phone into his jacket pocket. Then no one needs to shout anymore. Victoria stared at him. I was just robbed. The young woman at the next table quickly shook her head. No, sir. I did not rob anyone. I picked it up from the floor. Richard turned to her. What is your name? She hesitated, as if even saying her name at that moment felt dangerous. Annie. Annie, he repeated. His voice was neither warm nor cold, only cautious. Before Victoria saw the ring in your hand, did you leave your seat at any point? No, sir. I stayed right here. Victoria scoffed. Of course she would say that. Annie's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Because it is the truth. The truth is always easy to say after you have been caught, Victoria said. Richard looked at Victoria, and his expression shifted slightly. Let her answer. Victoria drew back a little, as if he had embarrassed her. You are questioning her as if this is some kind of misunderstanding. It may be. It is not. The words came out too quickly. Annie remained seated, but her eyes moved toward the tables around them. Mr. Howard cleared his throat. Mr. Whitmore, Miss Langford has asked us to call the police. One of my servers also suggested that we review the security footage. We are calling the police, Victoria said. I already told you that. Richard raised one hand. Howard, have they been called? The manager paused. Not yet, sir. I wanted to avoid escalating the situation unnecessarily. Unnecessarily? Victoria's voice rose again. She was holding a diamond ring worth more than most cars outside. Annie flinched. She spoke before Richard could. I did not know how much it was worth. I only knew it was a ring. Victoria gave a thin laugh, while the last of her tears still clung to her cheeks. You expect us to believe you did not recognize a diamond? I recognized that it was not mine. Richard turned slightly toward Annie. When you picked it up, what were you going to do? I was going to ask if it belonged to her, Annie said, nodding slightly toward Victoria. Then she started shouting. I shouted because I caught you. You shouted before you asked me a single question. Victoria was about to open her mouth, but Richard spoke first. That is true. Victoria's face tightened. Are you defending her? I am trying to understand what happened. You should be trying to protect me. Richard was silent for a second. From what? The question landed harder than he had intended. Victoria blinked. From being robbed, from being humiliated, from having to sit here while some girl, She stopped herself, but not soon enough. Mr. Howard quickly stepped in. "We can review the dining room footage in my office. Depending on the angle, the camera may show the floor area between the two tables." Victoria turned sharply. "Depending on the angle? So now we are going to pretend the camera might not show what she did?" Maria spoke again, this time more quietly, but with greater firmness. "It may show what everyone did." Victoria looked at her as if a waitress had no right to finish a sentence in front of her. "I don't remember asking you." Richard did not raise his voice. "Victoria." She looked at him, startled. He kept his tone calm. "Do not speak to the staff that way." For the first time since Richard had returned, Annie saw Victoria lose a little of her confidence. Mr. Howard gestured toward the back of the restaurant. "If you will follow me, I will open the system." Annie did not move. Richard noticed. "Annie?" She looked toward the manager's office door, then out through the front window, where the dark street outside reflected the lights of the restaurant. "May I call my mother?" The question was so plain, so small, that Richard felt his chest tighten. Victoria rolled her eyes. "Oh, for heaven's sake." Richard ignored her. "Of course." Annie reached for her purse, then stopped when she saw Victoria's eyes lock onto it like a guard dog. "I'm not taking anything else out," Annie said softly. "Only my phone." Richard looked at Mr. Howard. "Please stand here while she takes it out." Mr. Howard gave a small nod and stepped closer. Annie slowly opened her purse and took out a phone. Behind the phone, Richard caught a glimpse of a neatly folded piece of paper tucked into the side pocket. Annie realized he had seen it and quickly closed her purse. She dialed a number, waited, then swallowed hard when the call went to voicemail. "Mom," she said, trying to sound normal and failing. "It's me. I'm okay. Something happened at the restaurant, but I'm all right. Call me back when you can, okay?" Her voice caught on the last sentence. She ended the call before she could break down any further. If Annie's fear and courage touched your heart, please give this video a like. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from. And if you believe every innocent voice deserves to be heard, subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories about truth, justice, and courage. Maria set the water pitcher on an empty tray and stepped closer. "You don't have to go back there alone," Victoria snapped. "This is not a group activity." "No," Maria said, looking at Annie instead of Victoria. "This is a young woman being accused in front of a room full of people." Richard said, "Howard, bring up the camera footage." Mr. Howard nodded. "This way, sir." Victoria stood first, lifting her purse as though she were the one who had just suffered an unforgivable injustice. Richard did not follow immediately. He looked at Annie. "Miss Annie," he said, because he did not yet know her last name and did not want to pretend that did not matter. "You will watch the footage with us." Annie slowly stood. Her knees were trembling, but she did not hold on to the table for balance. Not while Victoria was still watching. She followed Mr. Howard, walking beside Maria, past Victoria, and toward the small manager's office. There, a silent camera could finally do what a room full of people had refused to do for her: tell the truth. The manager's office sat behind a narrow hallway near the kitchen, past a shelf of wine invoices, a humming ice machine, and a corkboard crowded with staff schedules. It was too small for the number of people now trying to fit inside it. "Mr. Howard took the chair behind the desk. Richard stood near the wall with one hand in his pocket. Victoria remained by the door as if the room itself had insulted her. Maria stayed beside Annie, close enough to be kind without touching her. Annie stood near the filing cabinet because no one had offered her a chair. She noticed that first. Not because she wanted special treatment, but because her body was shaking, and she was trying not to show it. Her feet hurt in the black shoes she had polished that afternoon. Her pasta was still sitting on the table, going cold. Her mother had not called back. Somewhere beyond the wall, plates clinked and people resumed their conversations in lowered voices, as if Annie's humiliation had become part of the evening's entertainment and now they were waiting for the next act. Mr. Howard moved the mouse on his computer. 4 security windows appeared on the screen. Front entrance, bar, dining room, and hallway. He typed in his password with slow care. Victoria crossed her arms. This should not take all night. Richard glanced at her. It will take as long as it takes. She turned toward him, wounded. I cannot believe your first instinct is to question me. My first instinct, Richard said, is to find out what happened. I told you what happened. You told me what you believe happened. Victoria's mouth tightened, but she said nothing. Annie kept her eyes on the screen. She was afraid to blink. afraid the truth might pass by, and no one would catch it. The room smelled like coffee, paper, and lemon cleaner. A tiny desk fan clicked each time it turned. It was strange, the things a person noticed when fear had nowhere to go. Mr. Howard pulled up the dining room camera. This is from Section 3. Timestamp is 8:42 p.m. Mr. Whitmore, this is when you left the table. Richard leaned closer. On the screen, he saw himself rise from his chair, phone in hand, and place a brief touch on Victoria's shoulder before walking toward the hallway. Victoria sat back and lifted her water glass. Annie was visible at the next table, looking down at her menu. There, Annie said quietly. I was sitting there. Victoria gave a thin laugh. No one said you weren't sitting. Maria looked at her. Let the video play. The camera angle showed the two tables from above and slightly behind. It was clear enough to show Victoria removing the ring and setting it on the table near her glass. Annie saw it and felt a rush of relief. At least that part was visible. Richard saw it too. You took it off. I already said I did, Victoria replied. It was uncomfortable. Mr. Howard let the video continue. Victoria reached for her glass. A waiter crossed between the camera and the table carrying 2 plates. For 3 seconds, the view was blocked. When the waiter moved away, the ring was no longer visible on the tabletop. Victoria pointed at the screen. There. That proves nothing except that the ring disappeared. Annie's stomach dropped. The video continued. On the screen, Annie looked down, bent slightly, then reached below the table. A moment later, she sat up with something in her hand. Victoria turned to Richard. You see, she had it. Annie stepped closer to the screen, because it was on the floor. But this camera doesn't show it falling, Victoria said. It shows you picking it up. That doesn't mean I stole it. Victoria lifted her chin. It means you had my ring. Richard did not speak. His eyes stayed on the footage, not on Annie's hand, but on Victoria's elbow before the waiter crossed. He watched the way the napkin shifted near the edge of the table. He watched Victoria's glass move, the fold of the cloth pull, the brief flash near the rim before the camera was blocked. Play it again, he said. Victoria turned sharply. Why? Because I asked. Mr. Howard rewound the clip. They watched it again. Richard leaned closer. Annie held her breath. The waiter crossed. The ring vanished. Victoria shook her head. This is absurd. We all saw enough. No, Annie said. Her voice came out stronger than she expected. You saw enough to accuse me, not enough to prove I did it. Victoria's eyes cut to her. Careful. The word was quiet, but Annie heard the threat inside it. For a moment she was back in the dining room with every stranger's eyes on her, and the old instinct rose in her. Be polite. Be small. Don't make it worse. Then she looked at the screen again and saw herself sitting there, alone, doing nothing wrong. I have been careful, Annie said. That's the problem. Maria gave her the smallest nod. Mr. Howard rubbed a hand across his jaw. This angle is not enough. It confirms Miss Langford placed the ring on the table, and Miss Annie picked something up from the floor, but it does not show the object rolling. Victoria seized on his words. Exactly. It also does not show theft, Richard said. Victoria looked at him as if he had betrayed her in public. Why are you so determined to protect her? Richard's face hardened. I'm determined not to destroy someone without proof. That quieted even Victoria for a second. Annie looked at him, uncertain. She did not trust him yet. He was still Richard Whitmore. Still the man who had come in with Victoria. Still the man whose ring this had been before it became Victoria's. But his words gave her something to stand on, even if it was only a thin piece of ground. Mr. Howard clicked through the camera list. There may be another angle. Maria stepped forward. The bar camera. Mr. Howard looked up. The bar camera faces the floor near Section 3. Doesn't it? Yes, Maria said. It's lower. We use it when people drop credit cards or when there's a spill near the walkway. Victoria's voice sharpened. You keep a camera pointed at the floor? Mr. Howard answered without looking at her. We keep cameras where experience tells us we need them. Richard said. Pull it up. Mr. Howard clicked another file. The screen went black for a moment, then showed the dining room from a lower angle near the bar. The picture was wider, a little grainier, but it captured the gap between Victoria's table and Annie's. Annie felt Maria shift beside her. Wait, Mr. Howard said. I need the same timestamp. He typed, adjusted, rewound. The footage jumped backward. People moved in reverse. Glasses lifted and lowered. A server stepped backward across the frame. Then the video settled. "There," Maria whispered. Richard folded his arms. Victoria stood very still. On the screen, Annie sat at her table, shoulders slightly rounded as she looked at the menu. Victoria's table appeared to the right. The ring was visible near the edge of the white cloth, bright even in the low camera quality. Mr. Howard pressed play. Richard left the table. Victoria watched him go, then reached for her water. Her elbow caught the napkin. The cloth tugged. The ring slid, tipped over the edge, struck the side of the table leg, and dropped to the floor. It landed, bounced once, and rolled in a small, shining circle across the polished wood. It stopped beside Annie's shoe. No one spoke. On the screen, Annie looked down. She paused, confused, then bent and picked it up. She turned it in her fingers once, not with greed, but with surprise. Then she lifted her head and looked toward Victoria's table, then toward the service station where Maria had been standing. She was going to return it, Maria said, barely above a whisper. Victoria said nothing. The video continued. Annie raised the ring slightly, her mouth beginning to form a question. At that exact moment, Victoria turned, saw the ring, and began shouting. The footage had no sound, but everyone in the office remembered the scream. "She took my ring." Only now, the words had nowhere to hide. Annie felt her knees weaken. She reached for the edge of the filing cabinet, not to look helpless, but because her body had been holding fear so tightly that relief hurt. The room blurred for a second. She blinked hard. Mr. Howard stopped the video. Officer Miller had not arrived yet. But the police no longer felt like the main threat. The truth was sitting on the screen, plain and quiet. The truth had not rushed. It had not cried. It had not pointed a finger. It had simply waited to be seen. Richard turned slowly toward Victoria. "You saw it fall." Victoria's head snapped up. "No, I didn't. You were looking in that direction." "I said I didn't see it." "You didn't ask her what happened?" Victoria's face flushed. "I saw my ring in her hand and decided the rest." Annie looked at Victoria. She expected an apology, not a perfect one, not even a kind one. Just a sentence that admitted what the whole room now knew. But Victoria did not apologize. Instead, she looked at the screen, then at Annie, and said, "Well, how was I supposed to know?" The words were small, but they cut deep. Annie stared at her. "You could have asked." Victoria's mouth opened, then closed. Annie's voice trembled, but she did not lower it. "I told you I found it. I held it out to you. You wouldn't take it. You just kept saying I stole it." Maria looked down. Mr. Howard removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Richard's face had gone still in a way that made the little office feel even smaller. Victoria tried to recover. "I was upset. It is a very valuable ring." Annie nodded once, slowly. "I understand it's valuable." For the first time, her eyes filled fully, but she kept speaking. "But so is my name." Victoria looked at Annie as if the girl had spoken out of turn. For a few seconds, no one in the manager's office moved. The low hum of the computer filled the space. On the screen, the frozen image still showed the ring beside Annie's shoe, bright and small, no longer a mystery. It had fallen. Annie had picked it up. Victoria had accused her anyway. Richard was the first to speak. "Her name matters," he said. Victoria turned toward him. "Richard, please don't make this into something dramatic. It already is. I made a mistake." Annie let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, though there was no humor in it. "A mistake is calling someone by the wrong name. You called me a thief." Victoria's face tightened. "I was emotional. You were loud," Annie said. "There's a difference." Maria glanced at Annie with quiet approval. Mr. Howard stayed behind the desk, his hands folded, watching the conversation move beyond restaurant policy into something no policy manual could cover. Richard looked at Victoria. "You need to apologize. I just said I made a mistake." "That is not an apology." Victoria's eyes flashed. "You want me to apologize to her?" The word "her" hung in the office like a bad smell. Richard's jaw moved once. "Yes, to her, to Annie." Victoria looked at Annie again. And for the first time, Annie saw something beneath the anger. Not regret, not shame, annoyance. Victoria was annoyed that the truth had inconvenienced her. "I'm sorry," Victoria said, each word stiff. "I misunderstood what I saw." Annie waited. That was it. Richard waited too. "And?" Victoria stared at him. "And what? You accused her of stealing." "I misunderstood." "You accused her of stealing," Richard repeated, slower this time. "In front of an entire dining room." Victoria's voice dropped. "Can we not do this here?" Annie spoke before Richard could. "You did it out there." Victoria turned on her. "Excuse me? You called me a thief out there," Annie said. "In front of everybody. You told them I took your ring to sell it. You cried and said I planned it. You didn't whisper that in this office. You said it where everyone could hear." The manager's office seemed too small for the truth Annie was finally putting into words. Victoria reached for her purse. "I'm not going to be lectured by an 18-year-old. Annie's face changed. "How do you know I'm 18? Victoria hesitated. Maria looked sharply at her. Richard did too. Victoria recovered quickly. "You look young. That didn't stop you from calling the police on me," Annie said. "I had every right to protect my property. And I had every right to eat dinner without being called a criminal." Mr. Howard exhaled through his nose. "Miss Annie is correct. The accusation was made in the dining room. The clarification should be made there too." Victoria gave him a look cold enough to end an employee's week in another kind of establishment. "Mr. Howard, I don't believe your job is to advise me on personal matters. My job," he said, steady but respectful, "is to make sure no guest leaves this restaurant falsely accused if I can prevent it." Richard nodded once. "We're going back out." Victoria stared at him. "You cannot be serious." "I am. You want me to stand in the middle of that restaurant and humiliate myself?" Richard looked at Annie, then back at Victoria. "You were willing to let her be humiliated." Victoria's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Annie did not enjoy watching Victoria trapped. That surprised her. Part of her had expected satisfaction, some hot rush of victory. Instead, she felt tired. Her hands still shook. Her mother still had not called back. Her birthday dinner was ruined in a way no free dessert could repair. She did not want revenge. She wanted the stain removed from her name before it dried. "I don't need a speech," Annie said. "I just need them to know I didn't steal from you." Victoria looked away. Richard stepped toward the door. "Then that is what they will know." As they left the office, the hallway seemed longer than before. From the kitchen came the smell of butter, garlic, and grilled fish. A line cook paused near the pass and looked over, then quickly looked down when Mr. Howard met his eyes. Annie wondered how much the staff had heard. Probably enough. In restaurants, news moved faster than food. Maria walked beside Annie. "You okay?" Annie almost said yes, because that was what people said when they did not want to be a burden. But the word would not come. "No," she said quietly. Maria nodded. "That's fair." When they reached the dining room, the noise softened again. It did not stop completely this time. People pretended to talk, but their eyes followed the group. Annie saw her table near the window. The plate of pasta had been taken away or maybe moved aside. Her lemon soda sat there, watered down by melted ice. The empty chair across from her looked lonelier than before. Victoria stopped near her own table. "Richard," she said under her breath. "Please, let's just leave." Richard did not move. "Not before this is corrected." "It has been corrected. You saw the video." They did not. Victoria's eyes filled again, but this time Annie could tell the tears had a purpose. They came too quickly, gathered too neatly. Victoria was not breaking. She was reaching for a tool she had used before. "Richard," she whispered, "do you really want to throw away everything over this?" Richard looked at her for a long moment. "Over this? You know what I mean." "I'm beginning to." The words were quiet, but Victoria heard the danger in them. Her tears stopped almost as quickly as they had appeared. Mr. Howard moved to the center aisle, near the piano. He did not clap for attention. He only stood with the posture of a man who had managed rooms long enough to command one without raising his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "thank you for your patience. There was a misunderstanding regarding a ring. Security footage has confirmed that the ring fell from Miss Langford's table and rolled near Miss Annie's seat. Miss Annie picked it up and was attempting to return it. The room went still. Annie felt the words enter the air and push back against the lie. Not erase it. Not yet. But push. A man at the bar lowered his gaze. The woman in the navy cardigan pressed her lips together. The older couple near the window looked stricken. Annie wondered if any of them remembered the way they had stared at her when Victoria first shouted. She hoped they did, not because she wanted them to suffer, but because people should remember the moment they joined a wrong thing by doing nothing. Victoria's face burned red. "I can speak for myself, Mr. Howard." Richard turned to her. "Then do it." She stood by her table, fingers tight around her purse strap. For a second, she looked smaller without the room on her side. "The ring was not stolen," Victoria said. Her voice was low. Richard did not blink. Louder. Her eyes snapped toward him. He said nothing else. Victoria swallowed. "The ring was not stolen. It fell from my table." She picked it up. Annie waited again. Maria's voice came from beside her, soft but clear. "To return it." Victoria's nostrils flared. She picked it up to return it. The words settled over the dining room. Annie should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the ache that comes after holding your breath too long. Her chest hurt. Her eyes stung. She wanted to sit down, but she also did not want anyone to mistake her exhaustion for defeat. An older woman rose from a table near the window. She had white hair cut neatly at her chin and a small gold cross at her neck. Her husband touched her arm as if to stop her, but she stepped forward anyway. "Young lady," the woman said to Annie, "I'm sorry." Annie looked at her, unsure what to do with that. The woman's voice shook. "I heard the accusation, and I looked at you like it might be true. I had no reason to. I'm ashamed of that." No one spoke. Annie nodded once. "Thank you, ma'am." A man near the bar cleared his throat but said nothing. Another guest looked away. That was all right. Not everyone had the courage to apologize once the mirror turned toward them. Then Victoria made the mistake that changed the evening again. She leaned toward Richard and spoke in a low voice, but not low enough. "Are we done now? Or does the little girl need a parade too?" Annie heard it. Maria heard it. Mr. Howard heard it. Richard heard it most clearly. He turned to Victoria, and the room seemed to understand before she did that something final had begun. "Say that again," he said. Victoria stiffened. "I didn't mean..." "No, say it clearly." "I was upset." "You keep saying that as if being upset creates character. It only reveals it." Victoria's face drained. Richard held out his hand. "The ring." She looked at him. "What?" "The ring, Victoria. It's my engagement ring." It was. The dining room went silent in a new way. Not curious now. Witnessing. Victoria's hand moved to the ring Mr. Howard had returned to Richard only moments before. Richard still held it, not her. The diamond sat in his palm, cold and bright. Richard closed his fingers around it. "My grandmother wore this stone," he said, his voice controlled. "She cleaned rooms in a Charleston hotel for 11 years before my grandfather ever owned one. She knew what it meant to have people look at her hands and decide they knew her worth." Victoria shook her head. "Richard, not here." "Yes," he said, "here." Annie stood very still. Richard looked at Victoria as if he were seeing not a stranger, but a truth he had avoided for too long. "Tonight you used her ring to shame a girl who did nothing wrong. You did not ask. You did not wait. You decided who she was before she spoke." Victoria whispered, "I made one mistake." Richard's voice did not rise. "No. You made a choice." The words moved through the restaurant like the last note of a hymn. Annie looked down at her hands. They were empty now, but still trembling. For the first time that evening, the emptiness felt clean. Victoria stared at Richard's closed hand as if the ring inside it might still save her. For years, she had understood rooms like this. She knew how to smile at donors, how to lower her voice when speaking to staff, how to cry without smearing mascara, how to make discomfort look like injury. She knew when to touch Richard's arm and when to let silence work for her. But now the room had changed its loyalty. It had not turned fully toward Annie, not yet, but it had stopped turning away. "Richard," Victoria said, softening her voice, "please don't do this in front of everyone." Annie almost laughed at that, but the sound stayed trapped behind her teeth. In front of everyone. That was where Victoria had wanted it when the shame belonged to Annie. Richard did not move closer to Victoria. You made it public. I was frightened. No, he said. You were certain. Victoria's face hardened for 1 second before she remembered to look wounded. You're punishing me for being scared after my ring disappeared? I'm holding you responsible for what you did after it appeared. A few people shifted in their seats. The older woman who had apologized to Annie sat back down slowly, her hands folded in her lap. Her husband kept his eyes on his water glass. Near the bar, 2 businessmen who had watched the entire scene with the safe distance of men used to other people's problems now looked uncomfortable. Mr. Howard stood nearby, his posture still professional, but his face had lost the polished neutrality he wore for difficult guests. He had seen proposals in this room, anniversary dinners, retirement parties, widows eating alone on the first birthday after a husband died. He had seen people be generous and rude and drunk and grieving, but he had rarely seen cruelty try so hard to call itself a misunderstanding. Victoria reached toward Richard's hand. Give me the ring. We can leave and talk about this privately. Richard looked down at her hand but did not open his fist. That is the problem, Victoria. Too many things like this are handled privately after the damage is done publicly. Her eyes flicked toward Annie. So this is about her now? Annie stiffened. Richard answered before she could. This is about what you did to her. Victoria's mouth tightened. You don't even know her. No, Richard said, and his voice changed. I don't, and that should have made us more careful, not less. That sentence settled into Annie in a way she did not expect. She had been treated all evening like being unknown made her easier to accuse. Richard had just said the opposite. Victoria let out a breath. I apologized. Annie looked at her. You corrected yourself because the video made you. Victoria turned. I beg your pardon? You didn't apologize when I told you the truth. You didn't apologize when I held the ring out. You didn't apologize in the office when we saw the video. You only said something when Mr. Whitmore told you to say it where everyone could hear. The room was too quiet again, but this time Annie did not hate the quiet. This time it gave her words room to stand. Victoria's voice dropped. You should be careful how you speak to me. Maria stepped slightly closer to Annie, but Annie did not look away from Victoria. I have been careful all night, Annie said. I picked up something that wasn't mine. I tried to return it. I answered questions. I let people stare at me. I let you cry and tell them I was trying to sell your ring. I called my mother and told her I was okay when I wasn't. I have been careful enough. Victoria blinked at the mention of Annie's mother, as if reminded for the first time that Annie had a life outside the accusation. Richard heard it too. You called your mother? Annie's chin trembled once. She hated that it did. She's working. She didn't answer. Is she coming? No, sir. She's on a night shift at the hospital. The word hospital moved through the older guests differently than the rest. People over a certain age knew night shifts. They knew nurses and aides and the quiet labor of people who kept bodies clean, fed, turned, and breathing. The older woman by the window pressed her fingers to the small cross at her neck. Victoria seemed to sense the room slipping farther from her. This is becoming sentimental. Her mother's job has nothing to do with my ring. No, Richard said. But it has something to do with the person you accused. Victoria gave him a sharp look. And what about me? Does anyone care that I was embarrassed? Annie stared at her. You were embarrassed after the truth came out. I was humiliated before it did. Mr. Howard looked at the floor for a moment, as if that sentence had found a private bruise in him. The front door opened, letting in a brief rush of Charleston evening air, damp and warm, carrying the smell of rain on pavement. A uniformed police officer stepped inside. He removed his cap, scanned the dining room, and approached Mr. Howard. Evening, he said. Someone called about a theft? Victoria straightened, as though the arrival of authority might give her back the ground she had lost. Mr. Howard answered before she could. Officer Miller, thank you for coming. The matter has been reviewed. Security footage shows no theft occurred. Officer Miller looked at Richard, then Victoria, then Annie. His gaze paused on Annie a little longer than she liked. Not unkindly, but officially. It was the kind of look that made a person aware of pockets, hands, posture, tone. No theft? He asked. No, officer, Richard said. The ring fell from this table. Miss Annie picked it up to return it. The footage is clear. Officer Miller nodded. I'll need to make a note since a call came in. Victoria spoke quickly. Officer, I reported what I believed was happening. Annie's head turned toward her. You didn't report what you believed. You reported what you decided. Officer Miller's eyes moved back to Annie. And you are? She is Annie, Richard said, then stopped because he still did not know her last name. Annie noticed. After everything, he still did not have all of her. That was not his fault, but it mattered. Annie Carter, she said. My name is Annie Carter. Officer Miller wrote it down. Miss Carter, did you wish to file any complaint? Victoria stiffened. Complaint? Annie froze. The question startled her. Until that moment, she had been trying only to survive the accusation. She had not considered that she might have a choice afterward. Richard did not answer for her. Mr. Howard did not either. Maria stayed beside her, silent. Annie thought about the dining room, the pointed finger, the word thief. She thought about the way no one had answered when she asked if they had seen her steal. She thought about her mother's voicemail and the note folded in her purse. She also thought about tomorrow morning, about work, about school applications, about how quickly a simple police matter could become a shadow attached to her name. I don't know, she said honestly. Officer Miller's tone softened a fraction. That's all right. You don't have to decide this second. The restaurant has footage. If you want a report documented beyond the false alarm call, I can explain that outside or somewhere private. Victoria let out a tight laugh. This is ridiculous. Officer Miller looked at her. Ma'am, I recommend you stop talking for the moment. The sentence was so plain that several people looked down to hide their reactions. Victoria's face went red. Richard slipped the ring into his jacket pocket. Victoria saw the movement and inhaled sharply. You're keeping it from me? Yes. It was given to me. It was entrusted to you. That is the same thing. Tonight proved it is not. Annie looked away. This part felt too private. Even though all of it was happening in public, she did not want their broken engagement to become another reason Victoria hated her. But Victoria was already looking at her that way. This is what you wanted, isn't it? Victoria said. You sit there with those sad eyes, and now everyone feels sorry for you. Richard's voice cut in. Enough. Victoria turned on him. No, I am tired of this performance. Annie's hands went still. For the first time all night, Richard raised his voice, not to a shout, but enough that the room felt it. I said enough. Victoria stopped. Richard stepped back from her. You accused an innocent young woman of theft. You suggested she meant to sell my grandmother's ring. You demanded police. You refused to take the ring when she offered it because you were more interested in proving your story than learning the truth, and now you are still blaming her for being wounded by it. Victoria's eyes shone, but this time the tears did not come. Richard continued, quieter. I can forgive fear. I can forgive confusion. I cannot build a life with someone who confuses cruelty with self-protection. The words landed with a finality Annie felt in her own chest. Victoria whispered, Are you ending our engagement? Richard looked at the woman he had planned to marry, and for a moment he seemed older than he had when he walked into the restaurant. Yes. A soft sound went through the dining room, not loud enough to be gossip yet, but close. Victoria took one step back. Because of her? No, Richard said. Because of you. Annie closed her eyes briefly. She had not asked for this. She had come for dinner. She had come for one quiet birthday meal in a room with linen napkins. But sometimes a lie pulled more into the light than the truth it tried to hide. Victoria picked up her purse. Her hand shook, though whether from rage or shock, Annie could not tell. You will regret humiliating me, she said to Richard. Richard's face did not change. I regret not seeing you clearly sooner. Victoria looked once more at Annie. For a second, Annie expected another insult. Instead, Victoria turned and walked toward the front door. Her heels struck the floor in hard, even beats. The valet outside opened the door, and the damp evening swallowed her pearl-colored dress. No one clapped. No one spoke. It was better that way. Officer Miller closed his notebook. Mr. Howard, I'll still need that footage saved. It will be saved, Mr. Howard said. Then he turned toward Annie, and this time his professional calm gave way to something human. Miss Carter, he said, I am deeply sorry this happened in my restaurant. Annie nodded, but the words felt far away. Her body had not caught up with the fact that the danger had passed. Maria touched the back of a chair. Do you want to sit down? Annie looked at her small table near the window. The ice in her lemon soda had melted. Her dinner was gone cold. Around her, people watched with quieter eyes now, eyes that wanted forgiveness without having to ask for it. I don't know, Annie said. Richard heard her and understood, at least a little. You don't have to decide anything for anyone else right now. Annie looked at him. I wasn't trying to cause all this. I know. I just picked up a ring. I know, he said again. Her lips pressed together, and this time she could not stop the tears. She turned her face away quickly, embarrassed by them. But Maria handed her a clean napkin without making a fuss. Annie took it and whispered, "Thank you." Richard stepped back, giving her space. For the first time that evening, no one demanded that Annie explain herself. No one asked her to prove her honesty. No one pointed at her hands. And still, her hands would not stop shaking. Annie sat down because Maria pulled the chair out for her, not because she felt ready. The dining room was still too bright. Every glass, every fork, every polished surface seemed to hold a piece of what had just happened. Her lemon soda sat in front of her, watered down and untouched. The little candle on the table, meant to make the room feel warm, flickered as if nothing had changed. Maria crouched beside her, careful to keep her voice low. Do you want me to call somebody else? An aunt? A friend? Anyone? Annie shook her head. My mother's at work. I can try again for you. No. Annie wiped under one eye with the napkin. If she hears a stranger's voice, she'll panic. Maria nodded. Then we'll wait. That we almost made Annie cry again. Mr. Howard stood a few feet away, speaking quietly with Officer Miller about the footage. Richard had moved toward the bar, not to drink, but to give Annie space while staying close enough to be responsible. He looked older now, his shoulders heavier. The ring was still in his jacket pocket. Annie did not know why she kept thinking about that. Maybe because the ring had caused everything, and now it was hidden away like a weapon after the damage was done. Officer Miller finished writing in his notebook and approached Annie's table. He did not tower over her. He pulled the empty chair slightly aside and stood at an angle, a small courtesy that Annie noticed. Miss Carter, he said, I want to make sure I have this right. You don't wish to make a formal complaint tonight? Annie looked at Maria, then at Mr. Howard, then down at her hands. What would that mean? It means there would be a written report beyond the call. It would include the false accusation, the footage, and what was said. It doesn't mean you have to press charges tonight. It creates a record. A record, Annie repeated. She knew records, school records, work records, medical records, police records. Some records protected people, others followed them like shadows. Officer Miller seemed to understand her hesitation. In this case, the record would state that you did not steal anything. Victoria's voice was gone from the restaurant, but the echo of it still lived in Annie's chest. She had called her a thief before knowing her name. She had cried in public and turned Annie into a story people could believe because it fit something they had already been taught. Annie lifted her eyes. Then yes, I want that written down. Richard looked over when he heard her. He did not interrupt. Officer Miller nodded. All right. Mr. Howard stepped forward. I'll provide the footage and a statement from the restaurant. Maria added. I'll give one too. Annie looked at her. You don't have to. I know, Maria said. I'm doing it anyway. The older woman from the window table rose again. Her husband stood this time too, slower, one hand on the back of his chair. They approached Annie with the carefulness of people nearing something fragile. Miss Carter, the woman said, my name is Elaine Porter. This is my husband, Frank. We saw you reach toward the woman with the ring before she began shouting. We should have said so. Frank Porter cleared his throat. He looked like a man who had apologized very few times in public and was trying to do it right. I told myself I wasn't sure. That was cowardly. I'm sorry. Annie did not know what to say. Part of her wanted to ask why their courage had arrived late. Another part of her was too tired to hold every person's failure in her hands. Thank you, she said. Elaine's eyes filled. You remind me of my granddaughter. She's 19. If someone treated her that way, I'd hope somebody would stand up before it got this far. Annie nodded. Me too. The words were not cruel, but they made Elaine look down. Officer Miller wrote their names. More than one guest shifted at nearby tables, as if wondering whether they should also come forward. Some did. A man from the bar admitted he had seen Annie hold the ring out. A woman in a red scarf said she heard Annie say she was trying to return it before Victoria began crying. Their statements did not undo the silence that came first, but they changed what would remain after the night ended. Mr. Howard leaned toward Annie. "Your dinner will be remade, of course, on the house." Annie looked at him. "No, sir." He blinked. "No? I came here to pay for my own dinner." Maria smiled faintly, like she understood before anyone else did. Mr. Howard softened. "Miss Carter, after what happened, it would be my honor." "I appreciate that," Annie said. "But I saved for this. I wanted to sit here and buy my own meal. I don't want tonight to end with everybody feeling sorry for me." Richard stepped closer then, stopping at a respectful distance. "That is a fair thing to want." Annie looked at him. "I don't mean to be rude." "You're not." Mr. Howard gave a small nod. "Then we'll remake it, and you may pay exactly what you intended to pay. Nothing more. No service charge. No surprise kindness slipped onto the bill unless you approve it." For the first time all evening, Annie almost smiled. "That sounds fair." Maria stood. "Same pasta?" Annie hesitated, then nodded. "Same pasta. And a lemon soda that still has ice." Maria's smile widened, coming right up. As Maria walked toward the kitchen, Annie's phone vibrated on the table. The screen showed Mom. Annie grabbed it so fast she nearly dropped it. "Mom? Baby? What's wrong?" Her mother's voice came through breathless, with hospital noise behind her. "I heard your message. Are you hurt?" Annie pressed the phone tighter to her ear. The sound of her mother almost undid her. "I'm not hurt. Where are you?" "At the restaurant." "What happened?" Annie looked around. Richard lowered his gaze to give her privacy. Mr. Howard stepped away. Officer Miller moved toward the host stand. The kindness was small, but she felt it. "Someone accused me of stealing," Annie said. There was silence on the line. Then her mother's voice changed, lower and steadier. "Did you?" "No, Mom. I know that. I asked because I wanted you to hear yourself say it." Annie closed her eyes. Her mother continued. "Are the police there?" "Yes, but they saw the video. It showed I didn't do it." "Good. Get the officer's name. Get the manager's name. Don't leave without a record." Annie let out a shaky breath that was almost a laugh. "I already asked for one. That's my girl." Those 3 words did more for Annie than the apology, the camera, or the witnesses. She bent forward, one hand over her eyes. "I was scared," she whispered. "I know," her mother said. "But scared doesn't mean guilty. It means you were standing in a hard place." Annie wiped her cheek. "I wanted tonight to be nice." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "Listen to me. A nice night can be ruined by other people. Your dignity can't. Not unless you hand it over." "Did you hand it over?" "No." "Then you still have the best part of the night." Annie looked toward the window. Outside, Charleston streetlights shone on wet pavement. People walked by without knowing what had happened inside. "I wish you were here," Annie said. "I do too. But I'm with you. Finish your dinner if you can. Not for them. For you." Annie nodded, though her mother could not see it. "Okay. And Annie?" "Yes, ma'am? You belonged in that restaurant before they knew you were innocent." Annie looked down at the folded note still tucked in her purse. Her mother had written almost the same thing that morning. Maybe some truths had to be given twice. Once before the wound. Once after. "I love you," Annie whispered. "I love you more. Call me when you're leaving, and get that officer's card." "I will." When the call ended, Annie sat still for a moment with the phone in her lap. Richard approached only after she looked up. "Your mother?" he asked. "Yes. She sounds wise." Annie gave a tired smile. "She sounds bossy when she's worried." "That too," Richard said, and for the first time his voice carried something like warmth. Maria returned with a fresh lemon soda. "Pasta's coming. Kitchen says 8 minutes." "Thank you," Annie said. Maria set the glass down. "Also, they wanted me to tell you happy birthday. I didn't tell everyone. Just the kitchen." Annie's face changed. "You told them?" "You mentioned it earlier when you ordered the cake," Maria said gently. "I remembered." Richard went still. "It's your birthday?" Annie looked down, embarrassed. 18th. Mr. Howard, who had just returned, heard that and stopped. No one spoke for a second. Then Richard said quietly, "My God." Annie did not want the room to turn soft again. She did not want pity replacing suspicion, as if both were ways for strangers to own her story. "I'm fine," she said quickly. Maria looked at her. "No one said you weren't." Mr. Howard straightened. "Then we will do this properly." Quietly. Annie looked wary. "Do what?" "Serve your dinner," he said. "Let you have the evening you came for." Richard nodded. "And then I will make sure a car gets you home." Annie shook her head. "I can take the bus. At least allow me to arrange a ride. I don't want to owe anyone." "You won't," Richard said. "It would not be a favor. It would be the least I can do after what happened beside my table." Annie studied him. He did not look like he was trying to buy forgiveness. He looked like a man beginning to understand that money could fix arrangements, not wounds. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's fair." Maria glanced toward the kitchen. "Your food's almost ready." Annie reached for her fresh lemon soda. The ice clicked against the glass. Her hand still trembled, but less now. At the table near the window, Elaine Porter raised her water glass slightly toward Annie. Not in celebration, just acknowledgement. Annie gave a small nod back. She was still tired. Still hurt. Still aware that the entire room knew her name now because someone had tried to stain it. But her mother was right. She had not handed over her dignity, and when Maria came back with the fresh plate of pasta, steam rising gently from it, Annie unfolded her napkin and placed it across her lap. Not because the night was fixed, because she was still there. Annie took the first bite because her mother had told her to finish dinner, and because sometimes obedience to love was easier than obedience to appetite. The pasta was warm now, remade with care. The sauce smooth and simple. The kind of food that should have comforted her. She tasted garlic, butter, a little black pepper. She also tasted the last hour in the back of her throat. Her body had not forgotten the accusation just because the room had moved on. Maria checked on her without hovering. "Too hot?" Annie shook her head. "It's good, good," Maria said. Kitchen was nervous. Annie looked toward the swinging kitchen doors. "Why?" Maria gave a small smile. "Because half of them have daughters, and the other half have mothers who would skin them alive if they served you cold food after all that." That drew a quiet laugh from Annie, short but real. It surprised her enough that she covered her mouth. Maria's face softened. "There she is." Annie looked down at her plate. "I don't feel like me." "You will." Across the room, Officer Miller spoke with Mr. Howard near the host stand. Elaine and Frank Porter had returned to their dessert, though Elaine still glanced over now and then, not with pity anymore, but concern. Richard sat alone at the table Victoria had abandoned. He had not ordered anything else. His water glass sat untouched. The empty chair across from him looked less like a place someone had left for a phone call and more like a future that had been removed without warning. Annie tried not to look at him too much. Whatever had happened between him and Victoria belonged to them. Still, it was hard to ignore that the evening had cracked open more than one life. Maria placed a small folded receipt folder beside Annie's plate. "No rush." Mr. Howard adjusted it like he promised. "Just the pasta and lemon soda. No charge for the cake, unless you still want it." Annie paused. "I ordered cake? You asked about it before everything happened. Chocolate layer cake." Annie remembered now, faintly. She had asked the price and said maybe later. It felt like something another girl had done hours ago. "I don't know if I can eat cake," Annie said. Maria leaned her hip lightly against the edge of the empty chair. "You don't have to eat it. You can take it home." Annie considered that. "My mom likes chocolate." Then it settled. "Put it on the bill." Maria opened her mouth, then closed it. She seemed to understand this mattered. "All right. 1 chocolate cake. On the bill." "Thank you." Richard rose from his table and approached slowly, stopping far enough away that Annie could choose whether to engage. In his hand was a business card, but he did not offer it yet. "Miss Carter," he said. Annie set her fork down. "Yes, sir? I spoke with Officer Miller. He has the report number. Mr. Howard will preserve the footage." Maria and the Porters gave statements. "If you or your mother need anything for documentation, my office will cooperate." Annie nodded. "Thank you. I also owe you another apology." You already apologized. Not well enough. Annie did not know what to say, so she waited. Richard glanced toward the table where Victoria had sat. I brought someone into this room who thought your dignity was negotiable. I did not know she would do what she did tonight, but I knew enough about her to be less surprised than I should be. That is on me. Annie studied him. He did not say it like a man performing guilt for an audience. His voice was low, meant for her and the few feet of air between them. You didn't accuse me, Annie said. No, Richard replied, but I left you alone with someone who did. And when I came back, I had to decide whether your word deserved the same weight as hers. That should not have been a difficult decision. Annie looked at her hands. Most people didn't think it deserved any weight. Richard accepted that without defending the room. I know. For a moment, the old piano player near the bar began playing again, something slow and familiar that Annie had heard in old movies her mother watched on Sunday afternoons. The music did not erase the discomfort. It gave it a place to sit. Richard extended the card. This has my direct office number, not my assistant's public line. If your mother wants to speak with me, I will answer. Annie took the card because refusing it would have been pride pretending to be strength. She might. I hope she does. She'll ask questions. She should. She might not be polite. Richard almost smiled. I won't require that. Annie looked up then. And for the first time she saw not just a rich man in a dark suit, but a tired man holding the consequences of his own blindness. That did not make them equal. It did not make them friends. But it made the moment more honest. Mr. Howard came over with Officer Miller. The officer handed Annie a small card with a report number written on the back. Miss Carter, Officer Miller said, this is the incident number. The report will state that no theft occurred and that video confirmed your account. If anyone contacts you or your mother about this, you can refer them to that number. Annie took it carefully. Thank you, he nodded. I'm sorry for what you went through. She looked at him. When you first came in, did you think I did it? Officer Miller did not answer immediately. Maria went still beside the table. Richard looked at the officer but said nothing. Finally, Miller said, I heard there was a theft and saw a young woman sitting where people were pointing. I didn't know what happened. That's not what I asked. The officer looked down at his notebook, then back at Annie. I wondered if you had. The honesty hurt, but it was better than a polished lie. Why? Annie asked. Miller exhaled. Because accusation has a way of dressing itself up as fact when enough people repeat it. Annie nodded slowly. That's a dangerous habit. Yes, ma'am, he said. It is. Calling her ma'am seemed to surprise both of them. Annie was only 18. But after tonight, the word did not feel too large. It felt like a small restoration. Officer Miller left after speaking once more with Mr. Howard. The restaurant door closed behind him, and the room seemed to breathe out. Some guests began leaving, moving quietly, avoiding the center aisle. A few looked at Annie with expressions that asked for permission to feel better. She did not give or deny it. That was not her job. Maria returned with a small white box tied with brown string. Chocolate cake for your mom. Annie smiled faintly. She's going to ask why the box looks fancy. Tell her it survived a war. Annie laughed again, a little longer this time. She might believe that. Mr. Howard placed the corrected bill on the table. Annie opened her purse and took out the cash she had folded that afternoon. 2 20s, a 10, some singles. She counted carefully, added tax, then paused over the tip. Maria had not caused the trouble. Maria had stood beside her in it. Annie placed more than she had planned under the edge of the glass. Maria saw the amount and shook her head. Annie, no. You did your job. I did what any decent person should do. Then decent people should still get tipped. Maria's eyes shone. You're stubborn. My mother says focused. I like your mother already. Annie tucked the receipt into her purse beside the note. Her fingers brushed the folded paper, and she pulled it out. Not all the way. Just enough to see her mother's handwriting. One day, you'll sit in every room they said you didn't belong in. She had sat there. She had almost been chased out. Then she had stayed. Richard noticed the paper but did not ask. That restraint made Annie respect him more than any question would have. About getting home, he said. Annie looked at him, ready to refuse again. He raised a hand slightly. You owe me nothing. But it's late. And after everything tonight, I would feel better knowing you got home safely. Mr. Howard can arrange the car through the restaurant account if that feels more comfortable. Mr. Howard nodded. We do that for guests often. Annie thought of the bus stop 3 blocks away, the damp air, the box of cake, her mother's instruction to call when leaving. She thought of not wanting to owe anyone. Then she thought of the difference between accepting help and surrendering dignity. All right, she said. Through the restaurant. Richard nodded. Of course. While Mr. Howard went to arrange the car, Annie stood and put on her light jacket. The dining room looked different from standing again. Earlier, standing had felt like being displayed. Now it felt like leaving on her own terms. Elaine Porter approached one last time. Miss Carter? Annie turned. Elaine held out a small card with trembling fingers. My granddaughter is applying to nursing programs too. If you ever need someone older to write a character letter after tonight, I'd be honored. I know that may sound strange. Annie accepted the card gently. It doesn't sound strange. Thank you. Frank Porter gave a small nod. You held yourself well. Annie looked at him. I shouldn't have had to. Frank's face fell. No, you shouldn't. That was enough. At the front entrance, Maria handed Annie the cake box. Mr. Howard held the door as a black town car pulled to the curb. The Charleston air smelled like rain and river water. Streetlights shone against the wet pavement. Richard stopped just inside the doorway. He did not follow her out. Miss Carter, he said. Annie turned. I will remember this night. She held the cake box against her coat. So will I. He lowered his eyes. I wish that meant something better. Annie looked at him for a moment. Make it mean something better. Then she stepped outside. The driver opened the rear door. Annie got in, set the cake beside her, and looked back through the window. Maria stood near the entrance. Mr. Howard beside her, Richard behind them, still and silent. As the car pulled away from the Magnolia Room, Annie took out her phone and called her mother. I'm leaving now, she said when her mother answered. You okay? Annie watched the restaurant lights fade behind her. Not yet. Her mother's voice softened. But you will be. Annie leaned her head against the seat, the report card in her purse, the receipt folded beside her mother's note, the cake box safe at her side. Yes, she said. I think I will. The car ride home was quiet enough for Annie to hear her own breathing. The driver did not ask questions, and she was grateful for that. He kept both hands on the wheel, eyes forward, the city moving past in pieces of wet pavement, old brick storefronts, iron balconies, and late diners walking under umbrellas. Charleston looked peaceful from behind the glass. That almost offended her. The world had kept going while she sat in a restaurant being called a thief. Her mother stayed on the phone for the first 10 minutes. Tell me the officer's name again, her mother said. Officer Miller. And the manager? Mr. Howard Bennett. And the man? Annie looked out at the passing streetlights. Richard Whitmore. There was a pause. Whitmore as in Whitmore Hotels? I think so. Another pause. Longer this time. Lord have mercy. Mama, I'm not impressed. I'm locating the size of the mess. Despite everything, Annie smiled. Her mother, Denise Carter, had a way of turning fear into a checklist. It was how she survived hospital shifts, overdue bills, and people who smiled while denying her what she had earned. He gave me his card, Annie said. Keep it. I did. And the police report number? In my purse. Good. When you get home, put everything on the kitchen table. The card, the receipt, the report number, the witness cards, all of it. We're not trusting memory with something like this. Annie leaned her forehead against the cool window. I don't want this to become bigger. It became bigger when that woman pointed at you in public. I know. No, baby. I need you to really know. You did not make trouble by asking for proof. She made trouble by telling a lie before asking a question. Annie closed her eyes. She cried, Mama. People believed her when she cried. Denise's voice changed, softer but not weaker. Some people know how to use tears like a clean white glove. Doesn't mean their hands are clean. Annie let that settle. Richard ended the engagement. What? He told her it was over. In the restaurant. Denise was silent so long Annie thought the call had dropped. Mama, I'm here. I'm just deciding whether that man has sense or whether he found it late. Maybe both. That's possible. The car turned onto a road Annie knew. The houses grew smaller, the lawns narrower. the streetlights farther apart. A corner store still had its sign glowing. A man in a rain jacket locked a laundromat door. Home was close now. "I have cake," Annie said. Denise inhaled as if the word had broken her heart a little. "You got your cake?" "For you. Chocolate. You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to." Denise's voice thinned. "I should have been there. You were working." "I'm always working." Annie sat up. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Blame yourself for her." Denise did not answer right away. When she did, her voice was steadier. "You're right. I won't." The car slowed in front of their apartment building. The porch light outside Unit 4 flickered the way it had for months, though the landlord always said he would fix it next week. Annie thanked the driver before he could step around to open her door. She took the cake box, held her purse close, and got out. "I'm home," she told her mother. "I'll be there in 40 minutes if the floor doesn't fall apart. Drive safe." "I always try. Lock the door behind you." "Yes, ma'am." The apartment smelled like lemon dish soap and the lavender detergent Denise bought only when it was on sale. Annie flipped on the kitchen light and stood still for a moment. Their table was small, scratched along one edge, with 2 mismatched chairs and a ceramic bowl for keys. This room had never made Annie feel watched. Tonight, even home felt like a place she had to return to slowly. She set the cake box on the table, then emptied her purse exactly as her mother told her. Richard's business card, Officer Miller's report number, Elaine Porter's card, the receipt from the Magnolia Room, her mother's folded birthday note. She opened the note and read it again. "One day, you'll sit in every room they said you didn't belong in." Annie sat down hard. For the first time since leaving the restaurant, she let herself cry without trying to make it quiet. Not long. Not dramatically. Just enough for the fear to leave her body in pieces. She cried for the way Victoria had looked at her purse, for the way no one answered when she asked if they had seen her steal, for the way the word thief had landed in the room before her name did, for the fact that she had turned 18 and learned, in one evening, how quickly adulthood could ask you to defend your own humanity. When the tears slowed, she washed her face, changed into sweatpants and an old high school t-shirt, and put the cake in the refrigerator. Then she took it out again, cut 2 slices, and placed them on plates. Her mother would say she was not hungry, then eat every bite while pretending Annie had forced her. Denise came home at 11:38 p.m. Annie knew because she had been staring at the stove clock for 20 minutes. The key turned, the door opened, and her mother stepped in wearing navy scrubs and tired shoes. For 1 second, Denise only looked at her. Then Annie was in her arms. Denise held her so tightly Annie could feel the hospital badge pressing against her shoulder. Neither of them spoke. There were some things mothers did not ask right away because they already knew the answer in the way a child's body trembled. Finally, Denise pulled back and held Annie's face in both hands. "Let me look at you. I'm okay. I know what you said. Let me look." Annie let her. Denise checked her the way she checked patients. Eyes, breathing, hands, the places hurt might hide. Then she kissed Annie's forehead. "She had no right," Denise said. "I know. Say it again." "She had no right." "Good." They sat at the kitchen table with the 2 slices of cake between them. Denise took the report number first, then the cards, lining them up like evidence. She read Richard's card twice. "He gave you his direct number?" "That's what he said." Denise tapped the card. "He better answer when I call. He said he would. We'll see." Annie pushed a plate toward her. "Eat." Denise looked at the cake, then at Annie. "You bought me birthday cake on your birthday. You worked on my birthday. I'm your mother. That's not the same." "It is tonight." Denise picked up the fork, but her hand paused. "Did they sing?" "No." "Good. I hate restaurant singing." Annie laughed, and Denise smiled like that small sound had given her back something. They ate in silence for a few bites. The cake was rich, almost too sweet, with thick chocolate frosting. It tasted better in their kitchen than it would have under the eyes of strangers. After a while, Denise said, "Tell me everything." Slow, so Annie did. She told her about the table by the window, about Victoria's first look, about Richard leaving for the phone call, about the ring against her shoe. She told her about holding it out and Victoria refusing to take it. She told her about asking the other tables if they knew she had not stolen, and how nobody answered. Denise's fork stopped there. But she did not interrupt. Annie told her about Maria, about the cameras, about the first angle that was not enough, about the second one, about saying her name mattered. When she finished, Denise sat back, eyes wet and angry. "That Maria girl," Denise said. "I'd like to thank her. She was kind. No, she was brave. Kindness is bringing extra napkins. Brave is standing beside someone when the room is against them." Annie nodded. "I tipped her. Good." Denise picked up Richard's card again. "And him?" Annie knew what she was asking. He was late. But when he saw it, he didn't pretend not to. Denise considered that. Late matters, but so does what a person does after late. That's what I thought. Mother and daughter sat with that truth between them. Then Annie's phone buzzed. She looked down. An unknown number. Denise's eyes narrowed. "Speaker." Annie answered and put it on speaker. "Hello?" A man's voice came through, low and controlled. "Miss Carter. This is Richard Whitmore. I apologize for calling late. Mr. Howard gave me this number only after confirming you agreed he could." Annie looked at her mother. Denise leaned toward the phone. "This is her mother. Denise Carter." A short pause. "Mrs. Carter, I'm glad you're there. I'm listening. I wanted to make sure Annie arrived home safely, and to tell you directly that what happened tonight was unacceptable. The footage is preserved. The police report is filed. My office will provide anything you need." Denise's voice stayed calm. "And the woman? The engagement is over. That is your personal matter, Mr. Whitmore. My concern is my daughter's name." "As it should be." Denise glanced at Annie, surprised despite herself. Richard continued. "I would like to send a written statement tomorrow confirming that Annie Carter did not steal, attempt to steal, or conceal the ring. I will sign it personally. Mr. Howard will provide one from the restaurant." Denise said nothing for a moment. "Do that." "I will. And, Mr. Whitmore?" "Yes, ma'am?" "My daughter is not your lesson." Annie looked at her mother sharply. Richard's reply came slower. "No, ma'am, she is not." Denise's face softened by a fraction, but her voice did not. "Then make sure whatever you do next is about accountability, not guilt." "I understand. We'll see if you do." After the call ended, Annie stared at the phone. "Mama." "What?" "You scared him." "Good. Men with money should be scared of mothers with documentation." Annie laughed so hard this time she had to cover her face. Denise laughed too, tired and quiet, and for a moment the apartment felt like itself again. Later, when the dishes were rinsed and the cards were placed in an envelope, Annie stood by the refrigerator and looked at the remaining cake. Denise came up beside her. "You still want to be a nurse?" Annie turned. "Yes." "After tonight?" "Especially after tonight." Denise nodded, as if that was the answer she had hoped for. "Then tomorrow, we finish your community college forms." Annie looked toward the kitchen table, where the note, the report number, and Richard's card sat under the light. Tonight had not given her the birthday she wanted, but it had shown her something she would carry longer than a cake, longer than a dinner, longer even than the bruise of Victoria's words. Her name could be attacked. It could be doubted. It could be dragged into a room full of strangers, but it could also be defended. And from now on, Annie Carter knew she would be the first person to defend it. Morning came too soon. Annie slept for maybe 3 hours, not all at once. She woke every time a truck passed outside, every time the pipes knocked in the wall, every time her own mind replayed Victoria's voice. "She stole my ring." By 7, she was sitting at the kitchen table in the same old t-shirt, staring at the envelope her mother had labeled in black marker, "Restaurant Incident." Denise stood at the stove making grits, though neither of them had much appetite. She had changed out of her scrubs, but the tiredness still sat in her shoulders. "You're not going to work today," Denise said. Annie looked up. "Mama, I have a shift at the bakery. I know what you have. I need the hours. You need 1 day to breathe." Annie almost argued. Then her phone buzzed on the table. Both of them looked at it. "Maria Sankets," Annie answered quickly. "Hello?" "Hey," Maria said. Her voice sounded careful, like she had been practicing how not to make Annie feel worse. "I hope it's okay I'm calling." "It's okay. I just wanted to check on you. Mr. Howard gave me your number only because you said last night it was fine for statements. I'm glad you called." Maria exhaled. "Good. I also wanted to warn you about something." Annie's stomach tightened. "What?" "There's a short video online. Denise turned off the stove. Annie's hand closed around the phone. Of me? Not the whole thing, Maria said quickly. Just the beginning. Someone recorded Victoria yelling. It's maybe 15 seconds. It shows you with the ring before we checked the cameras. The kitchen went quiet except for the low hiss of the burner cooling. Annie did not speak. Maria continued. Mr. Howard is trying to find who posted it. A few people in the comments are already saying they need to wait for the full story. But some are being ugly. I'm sorry. I thought you should hear from me before someone else sent it. Denise held out her hand for the phone. Annie put it on speaker. This is Denise Carter, her mother said. Where is the full footage? Saved at the restaurant, ma'am. Mr. Howard has it. Richard Whitmore's office requested a copy this morning, but Mr. Howard said he won't release anything without Annie's consent unless police require it. Good, Denise said. And the post? I'll send you the link if you want. Annie shut her eyes. No, Denise looked at her. Baby, I don't want to see it. You don't have to watch it, Denise said, but I need the link. Maria said, I'll send it to this number. After the call ended, Annie pushed back from the table and walked to the sink. She gripped the edge with both hands. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice. Somewhere upstairs, a child laughed. The world again, moving like nothing had happened. They're going to think I did it, Annie said. Denise came behind her. Some will. Annie turned. Mama, I'm not going to lie to you. Some people like a lie better when it confirms what they already wanted to believe. But we have the truth, and we have it documented. What if the bakery sees it? Then we show them the report. What if the school sees it? Then we show them the report. What if people don't care? Denise's face softened. Then we learn who people are. The text from Maria came through. Denise opened it on her own phone after Annie forwarded it, keeping the screen tilted away. Her mouth tightened as she watched. Annie did not ask what the comments said. She could imagine them. She had heard enough versions of them in real life. At 8:12, Richard Whitmore called. Denise answered this time. Mr. Whitmore. Mrs. Carter, I assume you've seen the video circulating. I've seen enough. I'm sorry. Apologies are not a plan. No, ma'am. My office has prepared the written statement I mentioned. I wanted Annie's permission before releasing any public correction that includes her name. Annie turned from the sink. Denise looked at her. He wants permission. What would it say? Annie asked. Denise repeated the question into the phone. Richard answered. That Annie Carter was falsely accused. That security footage shows she picked up the ring after it fell from Victoria Langford's table. That she attempted to return it, and that no theft occurred. It will also state that I personally witnessed the footage and that I regret the public accusation made against her. Denise looked at Annie. Your choice. Annie hated that choice. If they used her name, the correction could clear her. It could also make more people search for the video. If they did not, the lie might travel farther than the truth. Can he say my first and last name? Annie asked. Denise raised an eyebrow. You sure? Annie nodded slowly. She said thief loud. I want my name loud too. Denise's eyes glistened, but her voice stayed steady when she spoke into the phone. Use her name. Spell it correctly. I will, Richard said. Annie Carter, and send us a copy before you post it. Already in your email. Denise paused. You learn fast. I am trying. That's not the same as learning. No, ma'am, it isn't. After the call, Denise checked the email. The statement was plain, formal, and clear. No excuses. No softening. No misunderstanding doing the work of false accusation. Denise read it twice, then handed the phone to Annie. Annie read her own name in the statement. Annie Carter did not steal, conceal, or attempt to sell the ring. She read that sentence 3 times. Okay, she said. By noon, the statement was online. Mr. Howard released one too, from the Magnolia room. It said the restaurant had reviewed footage, cooperated with police, and apologized to Miss Carter for the failure to protect her from a public accusation before facts were known. Maria texted a screenshot, then another one an hour later. People are sharing the correction now. Annie sat on the couch with a blanket around her shoulders, not because she was cold, but because she needed weight. Denise had gone to sleep after making Annie promise to wake her if anything changed. Her mother had another shift that night. Life did not stop for injustice, not in their apartment. At 1:30, the bakery owner called. Annie almost let it go to voicemail, then answered, "Hello? Annie, it's Mrs. Bell." "Yes, ma'am. I saw something online." Annie closed her eyes. "Yes, ma'am. I also saw the correction." Annie opened them. Mrs. Bell's voice was firm. She was in her late 60s, a woman who had run the same bakery for 34 years and still believed bread should not be rushed. "You don't need to come in today. You will be paid for the shift. And when you come back tomorrow, anyone who has something foolish to say can say it to me first." Annie pressed her lips together. "Thank you. And Annie?" "Yes, ma'am. I know your hands. You handle money from the register, wedding deposits, tips, and my grandmother's rolling pin. You have never taken what wasn't yours." Annie put one hand over her eyes. "Thank you. That woman didn't know you. That's her shame, not yours." After the call, Annie sat very still. She had expected suspicion. Instead, a piece of her world had held. That afternoon, she opened her community college application on the old laptop Denise kept threatening to replace. The essay prompt asked why she wanted to enter nursing. Before last night, Annie had planned to write about her mother, about wanting stable work, about helping people when they were afraid. Those things were still true, but now another truth sat beside them. She began typing, "I want to become a nurse because I know what it feels like to be looked at but not seen. I know how fear changes a person's voice. I know how important it is for someone in the room to say, 'Let's find the truth before we decide who this person is.'" She stopped, read the sentence, and kept going. At 4 o'clock, Denise woke and found her still typing. "You ate?" her mother asked. "Toast. That is not eating. I'm writing." Denise came around behind her and read over her shoulder without asking, because mothers often considered permission implied when worry was involved. She read for a while, then placed a hand on Annie's shoulder. "That's good. It's too personal. Nursing is personal." Annie looked at the screen. "Do you think I should mention last night? I think you should tell the truth without letting last night own the whole story." Annie nodded. That sounded right. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Richard Whitmore. "Miss Carter, I will not call unless you or your mother wish to speak. I wanted you to know that the public correction has been sent to local outlets that picked up the clip. My office will also cover any legal consultation you choose, with no obligation to me. You were right last night. I need to make it mean something better." Annie showed it to her mother. Denise read it, then handed it back. "Better. Do we answer?" "Not yet." Annie smiled faintly. "You like making rich people wait? I like making all people wait until we know what we want." That evening, Annie and Denise ate reheated soup at the kitchen table. The rest of the chocolate cake sat between them. Less fancy now, cut unevenly with a butter knife. Annie's phone still buzzed now and then, but she stopped checking every sound. Denise lifted her fork toward the cake. "You know what my mother used to say?" "What?" "A lie can run fast, but truth has better shoes." Annie laughed. "Grandma said that?" "She said a lot of things. Some made sense." Annie looked at the envelope on the table, thicker now with printed statements and handwritten notes. Last night, the world had tried to reduce her to one ugly word. Today, other words had gathered around her name: student, daughter, worker, witness, honest. Not everyone would believe them. She knew that now, but enough would, and more importantly, Annie did. The next morning, Annie went back to the bakery, because staying home had begun to feel like letting the video decide where she could go. Denise wanted her to take one more day. She said it while packing her lunch in a brown paper bag, the same way she used to pack Annie's school lunches, when overtime left her too tired to be fancy. "You don't have to prove anything today," Denise said. Annie tied her work apron and checked her hair in the small mirror by the door. "I'm not proving. I'm working." That sounds like proving with different shoes on. Annie gave her mother a look. Denise held up both hands. "Fine. But if anybody says one foolish word, you call me. You'll be at the hospital, and I will leave a patient mid-sentence if I have to." "Mama, I didn't say mid-treatment. I said mid-sentence." Annie laughed despite herself. That laugh helped more than advice. She kissed her mother's cheek, took the lunch bag, and stepped into the morning. The bus ride to Bell's Bakery took 22 minutes. Annie knew every stop, every cracked sidewalk, every billboard that changed with election season and tax season. That morning, she felt people's phones before she saw them. Every screen seemed like it might carry her face. Every glance felt longer than it probably was. By the time she reached the bakery, her hands were damp. Belle's Bakery sat on the corner of a modest shopping strip between a pharmacy and a barber shop. The front windows were fogged slightly from the ovens. The smell of yeast, cinnamon, and coffee pushed through the door as Annie entered, familiar enough to make her shoulders drop. Mrs. Bell was behind the counter tying ribbon around a white cake box. She looked up over her glasses. "You're early." "I know. You eat breakfast?" "Yes." Mrs. Bell narrowed her eyes. "Toast is not breakfast." Annie stopped. "How did you know?" "Because 18-year-olds think bread becomes a meal if you eat it standing up." Mrs. Bell pointed toward the back. "There's egg casserole in the break room. Eat some before you touch my register." Annie blinked. "Yes, ma'am." No speech, no pity, no careful questions in front of customers. Just egg casserole and work. Annie loved her for that. In the break room, 2 co-workers looked up when she walked in. Jamal, who handled deliveries, gave her a nod that said he knew and would not make her talk. Kelsey, who decorated cupcakes with more patience than anyone Annie had ever met, stood and hugged her without asking. "I'm sorry," Kelsey whispered. Annie stood stiff for half a second, then hugged her back. "I'm okay." "No, you're not, but okay." Jamal leaned against the refrigerator. Mrs. Bell said if customers bring it up, we tell them the bakery is not a courtroom. Annie smiled. "She said that?" "She said it louder than that." Kelsey pulled back. "Also, somebody left this outside before opening." On the small table sat a folded card and a bouquet of yellow daisies in a mason jar. Annie opened the card. "Miss Carter, I was at the restaurant. I did not speak when I should have. My granddaughter told me, silence is not neutral when someone is being hurt. She was right. I am sorry. Elaine Porter." Annie read it twice. The apology did not fix the first silence, but it did something else. It proved the silence had followed someone home and kept working on her. Mrs. Bell appeared in the doorway. "Flowers stay in the front window if you want. Let people see that apology has a shape." Annie wiped one eye quickly. "You're all acting like I'm going to cry over daisies." Mrs. Bell snorted. "People cry over less before coffee." By 10 o'clock, the bakery filled with regulars. Retirees came in for bran muffins, contractors for sausage biscuits, mothers for birthday cupcakes, office workers for coffee they claimed was better than the chain down the road. Some knew about the video. Annie could tell by the way their eyes softened too fast. Most said nothing. One older man named Mr. Green, who came every Tuesday for rye bread, placed his money on the counter and said, "Morning, Annie. Good to see you." That was all. It was perfect. Then, near noon, a woman Annie did not recognize came in holding her phone. She looked around, found Annie at the register, and lowered her voice badly enough for everyone to hear. "Are you the girl from that restaurant video?" The bakery quieted by 1 degree. Annie felt Mrs. Bell's presence before she saw her. The older woman had stepped out from behind the cake case. Annie kept her hands on the counter. "I'm Annie Carter. So it is you." The woman leaned closer. "I saw the follow-up. Awful thing. But I have to ask, why were you at a place like the Magnolia Room by yourself?" The question sounded polite until it reached the end. Annie looked at her. "Because I made a reservation." The woman flushed. "I didn't mean anything." Mrs. Bell spoke from the side. "Most people don't. Right before they do, the woman's mouth opened, then closed. She bought a coffee she clearly no longer wanted and left." Annie let out a breath. Mrs. Bell went back to arranging cookies. "You handled that fine. I wanted to say more. You will, when more is worth your energy." That afternoon, Richard Whitmore walked into Bell's Bakery. Annie saw him through the front window before the bell over the door rang. He was not in a suit this time, just a dark coat and open collar, but he still looked like someone who could change a room's posture by entering it. Mrs. Bell noticed him too and moved closer to the register. Richard stopped just inside the door, eyes moving over the bakery until they found Annie. He did not approach too quickly. "Miss Carter," he said. Several customers turned. Annie felt heat crawl up her neck. "Mr. Whitmore." Mrs. Bell stepped forward. "Can I help you?" Richard looked at her. "You must be Mrs. Bell." "I must be. I apologize for interrupting business. I hope to speak with Miss Carter and Mrs. Carter." if she wishes, at a time convenient for them. I also brought the signed statement. He held out an envelope, not to Annie first, but toward Mrs. Bell, as if recognizing this was Annie's workplace and she had protection here. Mrs. Bell took it, opened it, read the first page, then handed it to Annie. Looks proper. Annie read the statement. It was exactly what he promised. Clear, signed, dated, on Whitmore letterhead. Her name was spelled correctly. Thank you, she said. Richard nodded. There's something else. I want to say it here, if you'll allow me. Annie stiffened. Here? I won't if you say no. The bakery had gone quiet. Mrs. Bell looked at Annie, letting her decide. Annie swallowed. Okay. Richard turned slightly, not making a show, but speaking clearly enough for the small room to hear. Yesterday, Miss Carter was falsely accused in a public place. She told the truth from the beginning. She was not believed quickly enough. I was present for part of that failure, and my name was connected to the person who caused it. I am sorry for that. I came here to make sure this written correction reaches the people who know her, work with her, and may hear lies before they hear facts. No one moved. Then Jamal said from near the bread rack, Facts got here. A few people laughed softly. The tightness in the room eased. Richard looked at Annie again. I also wanted to ask permission to speak with you and your mother about a scholarship fund my foundation is establishing. Annie's face changed. Because of me? In part because of what happened, Richard said, but not in your name unless you want that. Not with your picture. Not as a story for donors. The first scholarships would support students entering nursing, hospitality, and community college programs. People working while studying. People who don't always get the benefit of the doubt. Mrs. Bell crossed her arms. That sounds expensive. Richard almost smiled. It should be. Annie looked down at the envelope. I don't want to be used to make anybody feel better. I remember what your mother said. What did she say? Mrs. Bell asked. That her daughter is not my lesson. Mrs. Bell looked at Annie with approval. I like your mother. Everybody keeps saying that, Annie muttered. Richard said, Your mother was right. This cannot be about guilt. It has to be about accountability. I would like your advice, if you're willing. If you're not, I will still fund it. Annie did not answer immediately. She thought of the community college application on the laptop, the essay she had started, the bakery register beneath her hands, her mother's feet after 12-hour shifts. She thought of Maria standing beside her, and Elaine sending daisies, and the guests who had only found courage after the video. What would you call it? Annie asked. Richard seemed prepared for many questions, but not that one. I haven't decided. Annie looked toward the front window, where the daisies caught the afternoon light. Don't call it mine. I won't. And don't call it Victoria's mistake. No. Call it something about being seen before being judged. Richard nodded slowly. That is better than anything my office proposed. Mrs. Bell said, Of course it is. Offices ruin plain truth. Annie almost smiled. A customer near the door, an older black woman holding a box of rolls, spoke up. Baby, whatever they call it, make sure it helps somebody who rides the bus and works weekends. Annie looked at her. Yes, ma'am. Richard turned to the woman. It will. She gave him a look that measured more than his words. We'll see. After Richard left, the bakery did not return to normal all at once. It settled back in layers. Coffee poured. Bread was sliced. Someone ordered 6 cupcakes with blue frosting. Mrs. Bell placed the Whitmore statement in a clear sleeve and taped it near the staff bulletin board, not in the front window. For us, she said, not for gossip. Annie nodded. Near closing, Maria texted, Mr. Howard says the restaurant wants to invite you and your mom back for dinner whenever you're ready. No cameras required. Bad joke. Sorry. Annie laughed and texted back, very bad joke. Tell him maybe one day. When her shift ended, she took the bus home with flour on her sleeve and the signed statement in her bag. This time, when people looked at their phones, she did not shrink as much. At home, Denise was at the table with her reading glasses on, reviewing Annie's college essay. You're back, she said. Richard came to the bakery. Denise removed her glasses slowly. Did he now? Annie set the envelope on the table. He brought the statement. And he wants to start a scholarship. Denise read the document first. Her face gave nothing away until she reached the signature. Then, she nodded once. He spelled your name right. You said that mattered. It does. Annie sat across from her. He wants our advice. Our? That's what he said. Denise leaned back. Then he's either sincere or smarter than I expected. Maybe both? Maybe. Annie looked at the essay pages in front of her mother. Did you read it? I did. And? Denise tapped the first page. You wrote about being seen before being judged. Too much? No. Her mother's eyes softened. That's exactly enough. Annie picked up the paper and read the first line again. Last night, the words had come from pain. Today, after work, after the bakery, after Richard's statement, and Mrs. Bell's egg casserole and daisies in the window, the words felt less like a wound and more like a direction. She was still angry, she was still hurt, but she was also moving. And for the first time since Victoria pointed across that restaurant, Annie understood that moving forward did not mean forgetting. Sometimes it meant carrying the truth carefully enough that it could light the road for someone else. Denise did not call Richard Whitmore that night. She wanted to. Annie could see it in the way her mother kept glancing at the business card on the kitchen table, then at the scholarship notes Annie had written on a yellow legal pad. But Denise had worked 12 hours, her feet were swollen, and she still had enough sense to know that tired mothers should not negotiate with billionaires after midnight. We call tomorrow, Denise said, putting the card under the salt shaker as if it might try to escape. Annie sat across from her with the college essay open on the laptop. You mean you call tomorrow? We call tomorrow. I'm 18 now, and I am still your mother. That's not a legal argument. It is in this kitchen. Annie smiled and looked back at the screen. The first paragraph was good. The rest was tangled. She had written too much about the restaurant, then deleted half of it, then put some of it back. She did not want the essay to sound like a complaint. She did not want it to sound like she had learned compassion only because someone had hurt her. She had wanted to be a nurse long before Victoria Langford ever pointed at her. Denise seemed to read her thoughts. Start with why you wanted it before that night. Annie looked up. Before? Yes. Pain is not your origin story. It's just something that happened on the road. Annie let her fingers rest on the keyboard. I wanted it because of you. Denise shook her head. Try again. Mama. No. I don't want a whole essay making me look like some saint in orthopedic shoes. You wear orthopedic shoes. And I'm still not a saint. Annie laughed, then grew quiet. I wanted it because when I was little and you took me to the hospital daycare, I used to watch the nurses talk to people. Not the doctors, the nurses. They knew who needed a blanket, who needed water, who needed somebody to explain the same thing twice without making them feel dumb. I liked that. Denise nodded. Write that. So Annie did. She wrote about sitting in a plastic chair outside the nurse's station when she was 8, swinging her legs because her feet did not touch the floor. She wrote about the smell of coffee and disinfectant, about watching her mother carry warm blankets to patients who had no family in the waiting room. She wrote about the first time a nurse let Annie help tape a get well, drawing to an old man's wall, and how he cried because no one had made him anything in years. Then she wrote about the Magnolia Room, not as the center of the essay, but as proof of something she had already believed. People needed someone in the room who would slow fear down long enough for truth to catch up. When she finished, Denise read it twice. The first time, she kept her face still. The second time, she wiped under one eye with the side of her thumb. Annie noticed. Too much? No. Denise pushed the laptop back. Send it before you mess it up. Annie looked at the submit button. Her stomach tightened. Community college was not Harvard. She knew that. But to her, this application felt like a door. Not a fancy door. Not a carved wooden one like the Magnolia Room had. A practical one. One that opened toward night classes, used textbooks, clinical hours, bus rides, and a badge with her name on it. She clicked submit. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the confirmation page loaded. Denise tapped the table once. There. Annie let out a breath. There. The next afternoon, they called Richard from the kitchen table. Denise had changed out of her scrubs but kept her reading glasses on, which Annie understood as a warning sign. The legal pad sat between them with 3 columns. Questions, conditions, red flags. Richard answered on the second ring. Mrs. Carter, Miss Carter. Denise raised an eyebrow at the speakerphone. as if to say at least he learns. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "we have questions." "I expected you would. First, who controls this scholarship fund? My foundation would administer it, but I'm willing to create an advisory board. Who sits on that board? I was going to ask for recommendations." Denise looked at Annie. Annie whispered. "Maria," Denise said. "Maria Sanchez should be on it if she agrees. Someone from the community college. Someone from a hospital training program. And someone who has actually had to work while going to school." "That makes sense," Richard said. "Second," Denise continued, "no photographs of my daughter." "Agreed. No gala where people clap for themselves because they wrote checks." A pause. "Agreed. No essay contest where students have to turn their pain into entertainment for donors." This pause lasted longer. "That is a strong point." "Agreed." Annie looked at her mother. Denise did not smile, but her shoulders dropped a fraction. Richard said, "May I ask what you would want applicants to provide instead?" Annie spoke this time. "Proof they're enrolled or applying, proof they work or have family responsibilities, and a short statement about what kind of help would actually make school possible. Books, transportation, childcare, uniforms, exam fees, not just tuition." "That's very specific," Richard said. "It's real life," Annie replied. "Yes," he said quietly. "It is." Denise tapped the legal pad. "Third, this cannot be named after Annie. I promised it wouldn't be. I know what people promise when they feel bad." Richard accepted that. "The working name is the Scene First Fund." Annie looked up. Denise repeated it. "Scene First." "Annie said something at the bakery about being seen before being judged," Richard said. "I kept thinking about it." Annie felt embarrassed, but not in a bad way. Denise leaned back. "That name might do. We can change it." "No," Annie said. "Keep it simple." Richard's voice warmed slightly. "Simple is usually harder to hide behind." Denise looked at the phone, then at Annie. "All right, you can send documents. We'll review them. We are not signing anything today. I would not ask you to." "Good." Before Denise could end the call, Richard said, "Miss Carter, may I ask one question?" Annie looked at her mother. Denise nodded once. "Yes," Annie said. "Are you all right?" It was the first time he had asked without witnesses, without a restaurant around them, without public guilt sitting in the room. Annie answered honestly, "No, but I'm better than I was. I'm glad. I submitted my college application." "That's excellent. I didn't do it because of you." "I know, and I'm not helping with this fund to make your conscience feel clean." "I know that too." "Do you?" The line was quiet for a moment. "I'm learning." Annie believed that answer more than she would have believed a perfect one. After the call, Denise put the phone face down. "He may have sense." Annie smiled. "Found late?" "Found late is still found. We'll see if he keeps it." Over the next week, life did not become normal, but it became scheduled. Annie worked at the bakery. Denise worked at the hospital. Maria came by Bell's on her day off and stood in line like any customer, then hugged Annie near the pastry case. "I got asked about the board thing," Maria said. "You don't have to do it." "I know, that's why I might." Mrs. Bell, who was wrapping sourdough, said, "Do it. Young people need someone in rooms where rich folks start inventing rules." Maria laughed. "Is that advice or an order?" "At my age, the difference gets blurry." The video online began to lose speed after Richard's statement, and Mr. Howard's correction spread farther than the original clip. Some people apologized in comments. Some doubled down because pride was cheaper than honesty. Annie stopped reading them. She decided strangers could have their little courts without her attendance. One Friday, Elaine Porter came into the bakery with her granddaughter, a tall 19-year-old named Grace, who wanted to study physical therapy. Grace shook Annie's hand and said, "My grandmother told me what she failed to do. Then she told me what you did." Annie glanced at Elaine, who looked both ashamed and proud. Grace continued, "I just wanted to say you made her braver." Elaine touched her granddaughter's arm. "She made me ashamed first. Brave came after." Annie liked that. It sounded true. 2 weeks after the restaurant incident, Annie received an email from Charleston Community College. She opened it in the kitchen while Denise pretended not to watch from the stove. "Dear Miss Carter, congratulations." Annie did not read the rest before Denise knew. Mothers often read silence better than sentences. Denise dropped the spoon into the grits and covered her mouth. I got in, Annie said. Denise crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and held her daughter's face the same way she had after the Magnolia Room. Only this time, her hands shook from joy. That's my girl, she whispered. Annie laughed and cried at once. It's community college, Mama. It is a door, Denise said. Don't you dare make it small. That evening, Annie called Richard's office number for the first time. He answered himself. Miss Carter? I got accepted. There was a pause, then a quiet breath that sounded almost like relief. Congratulations. I'm telling you because the fund should know what students need after they get yes. Yes is only the beginning. I'm listening. Annie looked at the acceptance email printed on the table, beside her mother's old note in the thick envelope marked Restaurant Incident. They need help staying, she said, not just getting in. Richard was silent for a second. Then that is what we build. Annie looked across the kitchen at Denise, who was cutting the last piece of chocolate cake they had saved in the freezer from that night. It was a little dry now, the frosting cracked, but Denise put it on a plate like it was something worth honoring. And maybe it was. Not the night. What survived it? The first meeting for the Scene First Fund took place in a conference room that looked nothing like Annie's kitchen. It was on the 12th floor of the Whitmore building downtown, with glass walls, a long table, and a view of Charleston rooftops stretching toward the harbor. Annie arrived with Denise 10 minutes early, because Denise believed being on time meant already sitting down when other people walked in. You nervous? Denise asked as the elevator doors opened. No, Annie said. Denise looked at her. Yes, that's better. Richard's assistant, a woman named Carol, met them at the reception desk. She was in her 50s, with short gray hair, a navy blazer, and the calm manner of someone who had solved 3 problems before breakfast. Mrs. Carter, Miss Carter, Mr. Whitmore is in the conference room. He asked me to say there's coffee, tea, water, and no photographers. Denise nodded once. That was wise of him. Carol smiled. He is becoming wiser by instruction. Annie liked her immediately. Maria was already in the room, sitting near the middle of the table with a notebook open and 2 pens lined up beside it. She stood when Annie entered. You made it, Maria said. So did you. I almost turned around in the parking garage. Me too. Denise set her purse on the table. Good. Then both of you can sit down and be scared while doing the thing anyway. That's how most important work starts. Maria laughed and sat. Richard entered a minute later carrying a folder instead of having someone carry it for him. He wore a gray suit, but no tie. He greeted Denise first, then Annie, then Maria. He did not overdo it. Annie appreciated that. Too much warmth from powerful people could feel like a salesman touching your shoulder. Thank you for coming, he said. Before we begin, I want to be clear. Nothing is final today. We are here to listen, design, and make sure this fund does not become something pretty and useless. Denise opened her notebook. Good first sentence. Richard almost smiled. I hoped so. 2 other people joined them. Dr. Helen Morris from Charleston Community College, a black woman in her early 60s with silver locks and reading glasses on a chain, and Leonard Price, a retired hospital administrator who had helped build workforce programs for nursing assistants and medical techs. Richard introduced them briefly and then sat down. Dr. Morris looked at Annie. I read your application essay. Annie straightened. You did? I chair the Scholarship Review Committee for incoming health science students. Yours came across my desk. Dr. Morris smiled, not softly, but with respect. You wrote that people deserve to be seen before they are judged. That is a nursing sentence if I ever heard one. Annie felt her face warm. Thank you. Leonard Price tapped the folder in front of him. The problem with many scholarship programs is that they celebrate admission, not completion. They hand a student a check, take a picture, and disappear before the student needs gas money for clinicals. Denise pointed her pen at him. Exactly. Richard opened his folder. That's why I asked all of you here. Miss Carter said something that stayed with me. Students need help staying, not just getting in. Annie looked down at her notes. She had written that sentence in blue ink the night after her acceptance email. Seeing Richard take it seriously made her both proud and uneasy. She was still learning how to let her words enter rooms before her fear did. They spent the next hour building something practical. The fund would help with tuition gaps, textbooks, scrubs, exam fees, bus passes, childcare stipends, and emergency rent support for students at risk of dropping out. Applicants would not be asked to turn their worst experiences into essays for strangers. They would submit a short statement of need and a plan for continuing school. A committee with community members would review cases monthly, not once a year. Maria raised her hand halfway, then seemed embarrassed and lowered it. Richard noticed. Maria? She cleared her throat. Restaurant workers should be included too, not just nursing. A lot of people in hospitality want to move up but can't afford certification programs. Food safety, management, bookkeeping, English classes, things like that. People think servers are just passing through, but some of us are trying to build something. Dr. Morris nodded. That belongs. Annie wrote it down. And application hours should include evenings. People working day shifts can't always call offices at 10 in the morning. Carol, who had been taking notes quietly from the side, said, "We can set up evening phone appointments twice a week." Denise looked at her. "And real people answer?" Carol met her eyes. "Real people answer. No phone tree that makes folks give up? No phone tree. Put that in writing." Carol wrote it down without blinking. By the end of the meeting, the fund had bones. Not decoration, not a speech. Bones. Annie could see it beginning to stand. Richard leaned back. "There is one more matter. The first donation will be $5 million. Maria's pen slipped from her hand. Denise stopped writing. Annie looked at Richard. $5 million? Yes. That's a lot of guilt. The room went still. Richard did not look offended. It is also a lot of responsibility. Denise watched him carefully. Where's the money coming from? My personal funds, not the company. No tax strategy presented as charity, no marketing campaign. Leonard Price gave a low hum of approval. That answers my next 3 questions. Annie was quiet. $5 million was a number so large it almost became unreal. She thought of bus passes, shoes for clinicals, mothers choosing between rent and exam fees. Then she thought of Victoria's ring, a diamond heavy enough to start all this. How strange that one object could expose so much harm, and now money from the man who owned it might prevent a different kind. But Annie did not want the fund built on shame alone. "Can I say something?" she asked. Richard nodded. "Please." Annie folded her hands on the table. "I don't want this to be about one bad night in a restaurant. That night matters, but people were being doubted long before me. People get treated like they don't belong in classrooms, hospitals, hotels, banks, restaurants. Sometimes nobody points and screams. Sometimes they just don't call you back, don't promote you, don't believe your application, don't look at your references. If this fund only fixes what happened to me, it's too small." Dr. Morris smiled slightly. Denise looked down, proud but trying not to show too much. Richard said, "Then we make it bigger than that." "Not louder," Annie said. "Bigger." He nodded. "Understood." The meeting ended after 2 hours. No one took a picture. No one asked Annie to stand beside a giant check. Carol printed a summary and gave everyone copies in plain folders. As they walked toward the elevator, Richard caught up but kept a respectful distance. "Miss Carter," he said, "you made the fund better today." Annie held the folder against her chest. "So did everybody." "Yes, but you gave it its spine." She did not know how to answer that, so she looked toward the window. Below, cars moved along the street like small decisions. "I'm still angry sometimes." "You have reason to be." "I don't want anger to turn me into somebody who only knows how to fight." Richard was quiet for a moment. "My grandmother used to say anger is a match. It can burn a house down, or it can light a stove. You have to decide what you're cooking." Annie looked at him. "Your grandmother sounds like my mother." Denise, already at the elevator, said, "I heard that." Richard smiled for the first time that day. "I meant it as a compliment." "It was one," Denise said. The elevator arrived. Maria stepped in first, then Denise. Annie paused before following. She turned back to Richard. "What happened to Victoria?" The question surprised even Annie. She had not planned to ask it. Richard's face sobered. "She left Charleston for a while. Her family has attorneys. Mine do too. There are consequences being handled privately, but not hidden. The police report remains. The public correction remains. Does she think she did anything wrong?" Richard looked toward the conference room they had just left. "I don't know." Annie nodded. The answer disappointed her. but it did not surprise her. Richard added, "I used to think a person had to admit the truth before it counted. I don't think that anymore." Annie understood. Victoria's repentance was not required for Annie's innocence. The elevator doors began to close, and Annie stepped inside. On the ride down, Maria leaned against the wall and exhaled. $5 million. I nearly swallowed my pen. Denise said, "Don't be impressed by money until it turns into bus passes." Maria pointed at her. "That needs to go on a plaque." Annie smiled, but her mind was still upstairs, in the glass room where people had listened when she spoke. It felt different from the Magnolia room. Not safe exactly. Safety was too much to expect from any room too soon. But possible. That was the word. Possible. Outside, the afternoon sun had broken through the clouds. Denise put on her sunglasses and handed Annie the car keys. "You drive." Annie blinked. "Downtown? You're 18. You survived a billionaire's fiancée and a foundation meeting. You can survive traffic." Maria laughed and waved goodbye from the sidewalk. Annie got behind the wheel of her mother's old sedan. Her hands found the 10 and 2 position the way Denise had taught her. The folder from the meeting lay on the back seat beside her college acceptance letter. As she pulled away from the curb, Denise said, "Easy on the brake. I know. You always say you know right before you don't." "Mama." Denise smiled and looked out the window. "I'm just saying." Annie drove slowly through downtown Charleston, past restaurants, offices, and old buildings with doors that had once seemed closed before she even touched them. She did not believe every door would open now. She was not that naive. But she had learned something. Some doors opened when you knocked. Some opened when you pushed. And some, when they were built on lies, had to be held open long enough for others to walk through behind you. 3 months after the night at the Magnolia Room, Annie learned that progress did not arrive like a parade. It came in pieces. A bus pass approved for a single mother starting medical assistant classes. A textbook voucher for a man who had been working hotel maintenance for 14 years and wanted to become a building inspector. A child care stipend for a nursing student whose babysitter quit 2 weeks before finals. Small things, practical things, the kind of help that did not look dramatic in a press release but could keep a life from slipping off track. The Scene First Fund began without cameras. Richard wanted a public announcement, but Annie and Denise pushed back until he understood the difference between visibility and performance. In the end, the first notice went out through community college offices, hospital break rooms, church bulletins, union boards, and flyers taped near time clocks. Mrs. Bell put one near the bakery register. "Not too high," she told Jamal, who was taping it to the wall. "People shouldn't have to crane their necks for help." Maria brought a stack to the Magnolia Room and placed them in the staff break area. Mr. Howard added one near the employee entrance, then stood there for a while looking at it. "You okay?" Maria asked. He nodded. "Just thinking how many years I managed rooms for people who could afford to be seen, and hallways for people who couldn't." Maria touched his arm. "You're seeing it now." "Yes," he said, late. Late still counts if it changes where you stand. The first advisory board meeting after the launch was held at Charleston Community College, not the Whitmore building. Denise insisted on it. "If this fund is for students, meet where students are," she said. Richard did not argue. That, Denise later admitted, was either wisdom or excellent self-preservation. Annie arrived after a morning class in anatomy. She was carrying 2 library books, a half-eaten granola bar, and a notebook with pages already bent at the corners. College had not transformed her into someone with endless confidence. It had made her tired in new ways. She worked at the bakery 3 days a week, studied on the bus, helped Denise with laundry, and still sometimes woke hearing Victoria's voice. But when she walked into the meeting room and saw people sitting around a plastic table instead of polished glass, she felt more at home. Dr. Morris greeted her first. "Miss Carter, how is anatomy treating you?" "Like it has a personal grudge." "That means you're learning." Maria laughed from the coffee station. "That's what people say when they're not the ones memorizing bones." Richard arrived last, carrying his own coffee in a paper cup. He looked less polished these days, at least around them. Still expensive, still Richard Whitmore, but less surrounded by invisible armor. "Sorry I'm late," he said. Denise looked at the clock. 2 minutes early is not late. "I'm learning your standards." "You're approaching them." They began reviewing the first 10 applications. No names were included on the initial summary, only circumstances and needs. A restaurant hostess accepted into a bookkeeping certificate program needed evening childcare. A warehouse worker entering nursing prerequisites needed help with lab fees. A hotel housekeeper wanted English classes and a laptop. A young man recently out of foster care needed uniforms for a culinary program. Richard listened more than he spoke. Annie noticed that. At the first meeting, he had offered solutions quickly. Now he waited until the people closer to the ground had finished. When they reached the 5th application, Carol read the summary aloud. Applicant is a 27-year-old certified nursing assistant working nights, accepted into LPN Bridge program, needs transportation assistance and exam fee support. Statement says, I can pay rent or I can pay to move forward, but I cannot do both in the same month. Denise closed her eyes for a second. Annie looked at her. Mama, I'm Fina, but Annie knew that sentence had found an old place in her mother. Rent or moving forward. How many times had Denise chosen the first because Annie needed food, shoes, school supplies, heat? Dr. Morris said, approved transportation and exam fees. Leonard nodded. And emergency rent support for 1 month. If the choice is rent or advancement, we remove the choice. Richard wrote it down. Approved. Annie looked at him. You don't have to say approved, like you're the only one deciding. He paused, then nodded. You're right. Let me try again. The board approves? Denise lifted her hand. Now you're learning. Everyone voted. The request passed. After the meeting, Annie stayed behind to gather papers while the others went into the hallway. Richard remained near the door. You corrected me in there, he said. Annie looked up. Was I not supposed to? No. I'm glad you did. You looked surprised. I was. Not because you corrected me. Because you were right before I realized I was wrong. That happens a lot to people with money? He let out a quiet laugh. More than we admit. Annie stacked the folders. The fund can't become another place where people wait for one rich man to say yes. I know. Do you? He leaned against the wall, thoughtful. I used to think giving money meant giving power. It doesn't. Sometimes it keeps power in the same place and makes everyone say thank you for standing near it. Annie studied him. Did you come up with that yourself? Your mother helped. She tends to. The hallway outside was busy with students changing classes. Some wore scrubs, some carried work boots in plastic bags, some had children beside them. One older man with a gray beard sat on a bench, reading from a biology textbook with his finger moving under each line. Richard noticed him too. That could have been my mother, he said. Annie waited. She worked laundry in a hotel before I was born. Later, housekeeping. She wanted to take accounting classes, but schedules never lined up. Then my grandfather got sick, and that was the end of it. Did she talk about it? Only once, she said. A dream doesn't die all at once. It gets rescheduled until the calendar runs out. Annie's throat tightened. That sounds like something my mother would write on a refrigerator. She should. They walked toward the exit together, not close enough to invite gossip, not distant enough to pretend the conversation had no weight. Near the front doors, they saw Denise speaking with Dr. Morris. Maria stood beside them, waving her hands as she explained something about restaurant schedules and child care hours. Denise's face carried the expression she got when she was about to improve somebody's idea without asking permission. Richard stopped. Your mother is formidable. She knows. Does she? Annie smiled. Yes. But tell her anyway. She likes pretending she doesn't. Before Richard could answer, a woman's voice came from behind them. Richard. Annie turned. Victoria Langford stood near the entrance, wearing a gray coat and sunglasses pushed up into her hair. She looked thinner than Annie remembered, or maybe only less certain without candlelight, diamonds, and a table arranged around her. A man in a suit stood several feet behind her, probably an attorney. He held a leather folder and looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Richard's face changed, not with affection, not with anger, but with caution. Victoria, he said. Denise saw her from across the lobby. So did Maria. The air tightened. Victoria looked at Annie. For a second, neither of them spoke. Annie felt the old restaurant rise around her. The ring in her hand, the silence, the tears Victoria had used like a weapon. Her fingers tightened around the folders. Richard stepped half a pace forward. Why are you here? Victoria kept her eyes on Annie. I asked Dr. Morris for 5 minutes. She said this is a public building, and she couldn't stop me from entering. but she made it clear I should not approach anyone alone. Dr. Morris's voice came from behind Annie. That is exactly what I said. Denise joined Annie's side. And now? Victoria swallowed. Now I would like to speak. Denise looked at Annie. Your choice. That mattered. Not Richard's choice. Not Victoria's. Annie's. Annie looked at the woman who had once refused to take back her own ring because the accusation had pleased her more. Victoria did not look pleased now. Here, Annie said. Not alone. Victoria nodded. All right. The small group moved to a seating area near the lobby windows. Students passed by, unaware that a private storm had gathered beside the vending machines. Victoria sat, then seemed to realize Annie was still standing. Annie did not sit until Denise sat beside her. Richard remained standing. Maria stood near the wall, arms folded. Dr. Morris stayed close enough to intervene if needed. Victoria took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were tired. I owe you an apology, she said. Annie did not respond. Victoria continued. What I did that night was wrong. I accused you without knowing what happened. I humiliated you. I implied things about you that were cruel and false. Denise's face did not move. Annie asked, why now? Victoria looked down. Because my attorney told me silence was making things worse. Richard's mouth tightened. Annie gave a small nod. That sounds honest, at least. Victoria's face flushed. That was part of it. Not all. What's the other part? Victoria looked toward the hallway where students moved between classes. I watched the full video again. Not the part where the ring fell. The part where you held it out to me. I kept watching that. You were trying to give it back. And I wouldn't take it. Annie remembered. I asked you that night why you wouldn't. I know. You didn't answer. Victoria's eyes filled, but Annie no longer trusted tears by themselves. I didn't take it, Victoria said, because if I took it, the story would end. And for reasons I am ashamed of, I wanted the story I had already started to be true. The sentence sat there, ugly and finally clear. Maria looked away. Denise inhaled slowly. Richard closed his eyes for a brief moment. Annie said, because of what you thought I was. Victoria nodded. Yes, the word did not heal anything, but it named the wound correctly. Annie looked at her for a long time. I don't forgive you today. Victoria's lips pressed together. I understand. I might not tomorrow either. I understand that too. But I'm glad you said the real thing. Victoria lowered her head. I am sorry, Annie Carter. This time, she used the whole name. Annie felt it land differently. Not enough to erase. Enough to mark a line between denial and admission. Denise spoke for the first time. Apology is a door, Miss Langford. It is not the whole walk. Victoria looked at her. I know. No, Denise said. You are beginning to know. Keep walking. Victoria nodded once. Her attorney shifted, but did not speak. When Victoria left, no one followed her. Richard watched her go, then turned back to Annie. You okay? Annie looked at the folders in her arms, the students in the hallway, her mother beside her, Maria near the wall, Dr. Morris waiting with quiet strength. She thought about the ring, the video, the fund, the apology that had come late but finally told the truth. No, Annie said, but I'm still moving. Denise stood and kissed the side of her head. That counts. Outside, the afternoon had warmed. Classes continued. Applications waited. Someone somewhere needed bus fare, a textbook, a second chance that did not require begging. Annie adjusted the folders against her chest and walked back toward the meeting room. There was work to do. By late summer, the Scene First Fund had stopped being an idea people discussed around tables and become something with names, schedules, receipts, and consequences. Annie liked the receipts most, not because they were exciting, but because they proved help had touched real life. A bus pass mailed to a nursing student who had been walking 40 minutes after evening class. A check sent directly to a testing center for a hotel worker taking his building maintenance certification. A laptop purchased for a woman who had written her first application from a phone with a cracked screen. Small paper trails, quiet proof. Richard's office sent monthly reports to the advisory board. Denise read every line like a nurse, checking a medication chart. If a number seemed too smooth, she circled it. If a phrase sounded like public relations, she crossed it out and wrote, Say what this means. At first, Carol from Richard's office sent revised drafts back with polite notes. By September, she simply sent them to Denise before anyone else. Annie teased her mother about it one evening while they folded laundry at the kitchen table. You know they're scared of your red pen. They should be. Words can hide a lot of foolishness. You crossed out empowerment initiative 3 times. Because nobody paying rent wants an empowerment initiative. They want the light bill handled before it gets cut off. Annie folded a towel. Dr. Morris said the first group of recipients stayed enrolled through midterm. Denise looked up. All of them? All but one. And that one deferred because her son had surgery. The fund kept her spot open for spring. Denise nodded slowly. That matters. It does. For a moment. They folded in silence. The old window unit rattled in the living room. A neighbor's television played too loud through the wall. On the stove, rice simmered in a small pot. Life was not easier exactly, but it had more room in it than before. Annie had begun classes in August. Anatomy was still trying to defeat her. Medical terminology filled her notebook margins. She worked mornings at the bakery, attended afternoon classes, and studied at night while Denise quizzed her between loads of laundry. Define tachycardia, Denise said without looking up from a pair of socks. Fast heart rate, bradycardia. Slow heart rate, victoriacardia. Annie looked up. That is not a word. Means your blood pressure rises when somebody acts rich and wrong. Annie threw a sock at her. Denise caught it without blinking. They laughed, and that laughter no longer felt like escape. It felt like recovery. Richard called less often now, which Annie respected. When he did call, it was about the fund, not about making sure she still thought well of him. Sometimes he spoke with Denise more than with Annie. Other times, he joined board meetings and said little, unless asked. He had learned to sit in a room where he was not the center of gravity. Annie knew that was harder for powerful people than they admitted. One Friday afternoon, the board held a meeting at the Magnolia Room. Annie had not been back since the night of the accusation. She told herself she was fine with it. She told Denise she could handle it. She told Maria over text not to make a fuss. Maria replied, I make no promises. The restaurant looked the same when Annie entered. That was the first unfair thing. The same polished wood, the same soft lamps, the same white tablecloths. Her body remembered before her mind agreed. Her throat tightened. Her eyes went to the table near the window. The one where she had sat with a lemon soda and a hope she had not known was fragile. Denise touched her elbow. Breathe. I am. Better. Annie drew a deeper breath. Mr. Howard approached from the host stand. He looked older than he had in spring, or maybe Annie could see him more clearly now. Miss Carter, he said. Mrs. Carter, thank you for coming. Annie nodded. Thank you for hosting. His eyes moved briefly toward the table by the window. I reserved the private dining room, but if you would rather meet elsewhere. No, Annie said quickly, then softened her voice. No, the private room is fine. Maria appeared from the side, wearing her server uniform and a look that warned she might hug Annie whether Annie liked it or not. Annie held up one hand. Don't make me cry before a budget meeting. Maria hugged her anyway, but briefly. Fine. Business tears only. The meeting went well. The restaurant had offered to partner with the Fund for Hospitality Training, paid internships, scheduling support, and manager recommendations that meant something beyond polite letters. Mr. Howard presented the proposal himself. We've benefited for years from workers learning on the job without being given a path forward, he said. That needs to change. Denise looked at the document. Paid internships? Yes. Paid at what rate? Mr. Howard named it. Denise stared at him. He cleared his throat. That was the starting suggestion. I am open to correction. Maria slid a paper across the table. This is the correction. Richard coughed into his hand, possibly hiding a smile. By the end, the pay was higher, the hours more flexible, and the mentorship expectations written clearly, no vague promises. No exposure as compensation. Annie wrote that phrase herself, underlined twice. After the meeting, the others drifted toward coffee in the adjoining room. Annie stayed behind to gather her notes. Richard remained near the doorway. You did well, he said. So did Maria. She got them an extra $3 an hour. She did. Annie glanced toward the dining room. I thought coming back would feel worse. Does it? It feels strange. She paused. Like seeing a place after it has already seen too much of you. Richard nodded. I understand that. Annie looked at him. Do you? He accepted the challenge without offense. Not in the same way. That answer was good enough. They walked into the dining room together. It was between lunch and dinner, mostly empty. Sunlight came through the front windows, touching the table where Annie had once sat. Someone had placed a small vase of fresh daisies there. Annie stopped. Maria? She asked. Richard shook his head. Mr. Howard. Mr. Howard, standing near the host stand, looked almost embarrassed. Mrs. Porter brings them once a month. She says the table should remember better. Annie looked at the daisies. Elaine Porter still came to the bakery sometimes. She no longer apologized each visit. That was good. Repentance that never stopped announcing itself could become another kind of burden. Now she bought rye bread, asked about classes, and once brought her granddaughter Grace to a fund orientation. Annie walked to the table and touched the back of the chair. The last time she sat there, she had been trying to prove she was not a thief. Now the fund had helped 32 students. 32. She pulled out the chair and sat down. No one rushed her. Richard stayed back. Mr. Howard looked away. Maria stood near the service station, pretending to organize menus while watching like a hawk. Denise came from the private room and saw Annie sitting there. She did not come over immediately. She waited until Annie looked up. You all right? Denise asked. Annie nodded. I think so. Denise sat across from her, in the empty chair that had been empty on Annie's birthday. For a second, that simple act undid Annie more than any speech could have. The chair was not empty now. Her mother was in it. Tired eyes, strong hands, purse on her lap, looking at her as if no room in the world had the authority to shrink her child. I should have been sitting there that night, Denise said. You were working. I know. I still wish. Annie reached across the table. Denise took her hand. Maria approached quietly with 2 lemon sodas and a small plate of chocolate cake. Annie looked up. Maria. What? It's not singing. Denise pointed at the cake. That better be on a bill. Maria smiled. Already handled. Mrs. Bell paid when she heard you were coming here. Annie laughed. How did Mrs. Bell even know? Your mother. Annie looked at Denise. Denise took a sip of lemon soda. I might have mentioned it. They ate the cake slowly. It tasted better than the first one, or maybe Annie was simply able to taste it this time. Richard did not intrude. Mr. Howard returned to the host stand. Maria served another table. The restaurant moved around them, not watching, not judging, just existing. After a while, Denise said, You know, baby, healing doesn't always feel like forgetting. Annie looked at the daisies. What does it feel like? Denise squeezed her hand. Sometimes it feels like sitting at the same table and realizing you can leave whenever you want. Annie let that settle. Then she smiled. I'm not ready to leave yet, she said. Denise smiled back. Then we'll sit. By December, Annie Carter owned 2 sets of scrubs, 1 pair of white clinical shoes, a stack of flashcards held together with rubber bands, and a confidence that still came and went depending on the day. She was not magically healed. That was something stories sometimes got wrong. Healing did not arrive because Victoria apologized, or because Richard wrote a check, or because strangers online eventually moved on to the next thing. Some mornings Annie still heard the old accusation in the back of her mind when she walked into a room where no one looked like her. Some nights she still checked her purse twice before leaving a store, not because she had done anything wrong, but because being watched changed a person's habits. But the fear no longer got to drive. On a cold Saturday afternoon, Charleston Community College held a small winter recognition ceremony for students who had completed their first semester in health sciences and workforce programs. It was not graduation. Not yet. No caps, no gowns, no orchestra, just folding chairs in the student center, coffee in paper cups, cookies on trays, and families taking pictures under fluorescent lights. To Annie, it felt perfect. Denise arrived straight from the hospital, still in navy scrubs, with her badge clipped to her pocket and her hair pulled back. She carried a small bouquet from the grocery store, yellow daisies mixed with white carnations. Annie saw her and shook her head. Mama, it's not graduation. Denise handed her the flowers anyway. It is something. It's just first semester recognition. Did you finish first semester? Yes. Did anatomy try to kill you? Several times. Did it succeed? No. Then it is something. Maria came next. wearing a red coat and carrying a bakery box from Mrs. Bell. I was told to deliver these and make sure nobody serves store-bought cookies like this as a church basement in 1978. Denise peeked into the box. Mrs. Bell made lemon bars and pecan squares. Then this ceremony just improved. Richard arrived quietly, as he had learned to do. He did not bring press. He did not bring an assistant carrying anything official. He brought an envelope with the latest Scene First Fund report and stood near the back until Annie waved him over. "You made it," she said. "I said I would. You rich people say a lot of things." Denise coughed into her coffee. Maria looked away, smiling. Richard accepted it. Fair. Dr. Morris began the ceremony with a short speech about persistence. She did not make it sound glamorous. She spoke about alarm clocks, late buses, sick children, second jobs, failed quizzes, and students who came back the next day anyway. Success, she said, looking over the room, is often less about one grand victory and more about refusing to let one hard day become the final chapter. Annie felt those words land. When her name was called, she walked to the front to receive a certificate for completing her first semester with honors. It was only a sheet of paper in a blue folder. But Denise stood up as if Annie had just crossed a stage at a medical school graduation. Maria clapped loudest. Richard clapped with the careful pride of someone who knew this moment did not belong to him. Afterward, they gathered near the refreshment table. Denise held Annie's certificate and read it 3 times. "You're going to wear the ink off," Annie said. "I'm checking for errors." "You already checked." "I'm still checking." Maria handed Annie a lemon bar. "Eat. Smart people need sugar." Richard gave the envelope to Denise first, then to Annie. The fund report. 48 students received support this semester. 46 stayed enrolled. 1 graduated from a medical billing certificate program last week. 1 deferred for family medical reasons and has funding held for spring. Annie opened the report. There were no glossy photos, just numbers, short summaries, and practical notes. Bus passes, lab fees, exam costs, emergency rent, childcare, uniforms. 48 students. Annie touched the page. That's 48 rooms someone didn't get pushed out of. Richard nodded. And spring applications are already coming in. Denise looked at him. Still no gala? No gala. No giant picture of my daughter? No giant picture. No speeches where people say, underserved 6 times and never say rent? Richard smiled. No. Denise handed the report back to Annie. He may survive. The group laughed, and Annie felt something loosen in her chest. Later, after the ceremony ended, Annie stepped outside alone for a moment. The afternoon air was cool. Students and families moved across the walkway, carrying certificates, coffee cups, flowers, and tired children. Nothing about the scene would make national news. That was what made it beautiful. Ordinary people being proud of ordinary progress. A father taking a picture of his daughter in scrubs, a grandmother wiping her eyes. A young man calling someone to say, "I did it." Annie sat on a bench near the entrance and looked down at her certificate. Richard found her there a few minutes later but did not sit until she nodded. "Big day," he said. "Small big day. Those are often better." She looked at him. "Do you still have the ring?" He seemed surprised by the question. "Yes. It's in a safe. Will you give it to someone else one day?" Richard looked toward the parking lot. "I don't know. For a while, I thought the ring was ruined by what happened. Then my mother's sister told me something. She said a thing doesn't become dirty because someone misused it. It becomes heavy. You have to decide whether you can carry what it now remembers." Annie thought about that. "That's good." "It is. I didn't come up with it. I figured." He laughed softly. Annie looked back at the certificate. "I used to think that night was going to be the thing people remembered about me. It isn't. Some people still might. Some people remember only the easiest version of a story." She nodded. "I'm trying not to live for some people." "That sounds wise." "It sounds like my mother. Most wise things do." Denise opened the student center door and called out, "Annie, Maria is trying to take lemon bars home in her purse." Maria's voice came from inside. "That is a false accusation." Annie laughed, and for once the word accusation did not hurt. She stood, certificate in one hand, flowers in the other. Richard rose too. Before they went inside, Annie paused. "Mr. Whitmore?" "Yes? Thank you for making it mean something better." He looked at her, and the regret in his face was still there. but it no longer asked her to fix it for him. Thank you for insisting that I do. Inside, Denise was wrapping lemon bars in napkins while pretending not to. Maria had frosting on her sleeve. Dr. Morris was speaking with a student who had brought 3 children to the ceremony. Mrs. Bell had sent a note taped to the bakery box. First semester down. Don't get proud and forget to eat breakfast. Annie tucked the note beside her certificate. That evening, Annie and Denise drove home with the heater rattling and the flowers resting across Annie's lap. On the kitchen table, Denise placed the certificate next to the old birthday note from months earlier. One day, you'll sit in every room they said you didn't belong in. Annie read it again, then placed the semester certificate beside it. Denise watched her. You keeping both there? For tonight. And tomorrow? Annie smiled. Tomorrow I study for dosage calculations. Denise groaned. Lord, back to math. Back to math. They ate leftover soup and one of Mrs. Bell's pecan squares each. After dinner, Denise went to bed early before her next shift. Annie stayed in the kitchen, the small lamp over the table casting a circle of light over the note, the certificate, and the fund report. She thought of the magnolia room, of the ring in her hand, of Victoria's finger pointed across a room. She thought of the first camera angle that had not been enough, and the second one that had shown the truth. She thought of strangers who had stayed silent, then learned to speak. She thought of Maria standing beside her, Mr. Howard saving the footage, Officer Miller writing the report, Elaine sending daisies, Richard learning to listen, and Denise teaching her that dignity could bend under pain without breaking. Annie did not believe every wrong thing became right. Some damage remained. Some apologies came late. Some people never admitted what they had done. But she believed this now. A lie could enter a room loudly and still not get the final word. She picked up a pen and opened her anatomy notebook. At the top of a clean page, before writing anything about muscles or medication conversions, she wrote one sentence for herself. I was seen before I was judged, and now I will do that for others. Then she began to study. Outside, Charleston settled into evening. Somewhere downtown, the magnolia room filled with dinner guests again. Silverware touched plates. Glasses caught the light. People sat at tables they could afford, and people served them with names most guests never asked. In a hospital across town, Denise Carter walked another hallway in tired shoes. At Bell's bakery, Mrs. Bell set dough to rise for morning. At the community college, applications waited in a computer system for students hoping one yes could change the shape of a year. And in a small apartment with a flickering porch light, Annie Carter kept turning pages. Not because the world had become fair, because she had learned fairness was not something you waited for quietly. Sometimes you asked for the camera, sometimes you made them say your name, and sometimes, after the whole room had finally heard the truth, you sat back down, finished your dinner, and built a door for the next person to walk through. The lesson of Annie's story is simple but powerful. Never let someone else's accusation become your identity. A lie may enter the room loudly, but truth still has the power to stand taller when someone is brave enough to ask for it. Annie teaches us that dignity is not measured by money, status, or the table we sit at. It is shown in the way we refuse to lower our heads when we have done nothing wrong. And just as important, the story reminds us that silence can wound almost as deeply as cruelty. When we see someone being judged unfairly, our voice may be the difference between shame and justice. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.